How can we move this? Just move up?
You don't want your video?
Yeah, I don't want to, I cannot just close it somehow. Okay. Srila Prabhupada, somehow or other, I apologize, I did not tell what is really doing here.
You can begin with saying whatever.
Even with, okay. Hare Krishna, we are reading Lila Aram.
Oh. Chapter 6.
Chapter 6, okay. Srila Prabhupada, somehow or other, my intention of preaching the message of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu increased, and the other side decreased. I was not disinclined, but Krishna forced me. You must give up. The history is known, how it decreased. In Srimad Bhagavatam, Queen Kunti had also prayed, my dear Lord Krishna, your lordship can easily be approached, but only by those who are materially exhausted. One who is on the path of material progress, trying to improve himself with respectable parentage, great opulence, high education, and bodily beauty cannot approach you with sincere feeling. Srila Prabhupada answered, so in 1950, I retired practically, not retired, but a little in touch with business, whatever is going on. Then almost it became nil. Whatever was there, all right, you do whatever you like. Abhay's wife independently moved along with her sons back to her father's house at 72 Mahatma Gandhi Road. She had reasoned that her financial support was becoming precarious. Abhay was spending most of his time away from home. He was gradually disassociating himself from the family. When, after several months, he would meet his wife and children, his father-in-law would criticize him. You're always going outside. You're always worshiping God. You are not looking after my family. Whenever he could, Abhay would send his family some money. Mr. Sudhir Kumar Dutta, Abhai's nephew, I sometimes noticed how he was thinking so many things about his family, about his writings, about making bigger and bigger in business. What to do. He was thinking seriously to earn more money from his business. But that means he has to give more time for his business. And his writing, he'd never give up. He was writing more and more, and people sometimes abused him. Oh my goodness. I apologize. I did something wrong. Just add pickles. Okay. He was writing more and more, and people sometimes abused him. Hey, you are writing really religious things. You are only thinking of God? Then who will maintain your family? What will you do for the family? Sometimes he argued with them. What has this family given me? Why should I forget about God? This is the real thing, what I am doing. You cannot realize what I am doing. On a visit to Calcutta, Abhay stayed at the home of his father-in-law, where he was given his own room. When his wife served him dinner, he noticed that everything had been purchased from the market. How is this? He asked. The cook is sick today, Radharani replied. Abhay thought, it is better that we not live here at the home of her father, or else she will be spoiled even more. So he moved his family to a new address on Chetla Street, where he sometimes stayed with his family for a few months, writing articles and doing a minimal amount of business. But most of the time, he stayed in Allahabad. In Allahabad, Abhay, now 54, lived like a vanaprastha, or one who has retired from family life. He was indifferent to the activities of family and business. Activities a family man generally considers his prime object of responsibility and happiness. In his writings, Abhay had several times discussed the four ashramas, or spiritual divisions of Vedic society, brahmachari, grahastha, vanaprastha, and sannyasa. In the first division, the brahmachari ashrama, a young boy's parents sent him to the place of the guru, or gurukula, where he lives a simple life, studying the Vedic literature under the guidance of his guru. Thus, in his childhood and youth, he learns the principles of austerity and spiritual knowledge that form the basis of his entire life. At the age of 21, the brahmachari may take a wife and thus enter the next ashrama, the grahastha ashrama, or like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he may choose to remain lifelong brahmachari. In his boyhood, Abhay had remained celibate and had imbibed the principle of devotion to Krishna from his father and mother. Although he had lived at home, his upbringing had been the equivalent of brahmachari life. And by marriage, at the age of 21, he had entered the Grihastha ashrama at the appropriate age. Gaur Mohan's example had shown Abhay how to remain a devotee of Krishna, even in family life. And as Vaishnavas, Abhay and his wife had avoided the excess of materialistic household life. At 50, a man is supposed to retire from his family activities, and this stage is called Vanaprashta. In Vanaprashta ashrama, both man and wife agree to abstain from further sexual contact. They may continue living together, but the emphasis is on spiritual partnership. As Vanaprashtas, they may travel together on pilgrimage to the holy places in India, preparing for their inevitable departure from the material world. Thus, the Vedic ashramas, after allowing one to fulfill material life, enable one to end the cycle of repeated birth and death and attain the eternal spiritual world. A man of 50 should be able to see by his aging body that inevitable death is approaching, and he should have the good sense to prepare. In the final division, the sannyasa ashrama, the man places his wife in the care of a grown son and fully dedicates himself to serving the Supreme Lord. Formerly, the sannyasa ashrama meant a solitary life of penances in the Himalayas. But in Gaudiya Vaishnava life, Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had emphasized preaching. Although Abhay had not formally defined his status within the four ashramas, he appeared to be living more as a vanaprashta than grahastha. He saw his business failures and his distasteful family situation as Krishna's blessings, freeing from family responsibilities and turning him wholeheartedly towards executing Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's order to preach. In Allahabad, Abhay managed to save enough money to revive the printing of Back to Godhead, and in February 1952, from his editorial office and home at 57B Canning Road, the first issue of 8 years appeared. As before, he did everything himself, all the writing, typing, editing, meeting with the printer, and finally distributing the copies by hand, as well as mailing them to respectable leaders throughout India. Thus, he felt, was the real purpose of living in Allahabad or anywhere. This was the best use of money, the purpose of human life, to engage fully and glorify the Supreme Lord. Other things were temporary and would soon be lost. When he visited his family in Calcutta, old friends would gather in his room and he would preach and give classes on Bhagavad Gita. Abhay invited his wife and family to take part in these discussions, but they would resolutely sit in an upstairs room, often taking tea, as if in a defiance of his preaching. Abhay was supporting them, as he was still associating with them, but he was bent on preaching, and they were not making it attractive for him to do so within the family. If there were to be family life of Abhay, then his wife and sons would have to recognize and rejoice in the fact that he was becoming a full-fledged preacher. They would have to understand that his life's concern was to serve his spiritual master's mission. They could not simply ignore his transformation. They could not insist that he was simply an ordinary man. Abhay continued to try to draw his wife in, hoping she would gradually follow him in the preacher's life. But she had not the slightest interest in her husband's preaching. And why should he spend his days worrying about family, chemicals, and money? Let his relatives criticize, but back to Godhead was the real service he could offer to the whole family of mankind. Mahavendra Puri, a great spiritual preceptor and predecessor of Lord Chaitanya, had written about the devotee's indifference to worldly criticism. O demigods and forefathers, please excuse me. I'm unable to perform any more offerings for your pleasure. Now I have decided to free myself from all reactions to sin simply by remembering anywhere and everywhere the great descendant of Yadu and the great enemy of Kamsa, Lord Krishna. I think that this is sufficient for me. So what is the use of further endeavors? Let this sharp moralist accuse me of being illusioned. I do not mind. Experts in Vedic activities may slander me as being misled. Friends and relatives may call me frustrated. My brothers may call me a fool. The wealthy Maimonides may point me out as a mad, and the learned philosophers may assert that I am much too proud. Still, my mind does not budge in an inch from the determination to serve the lotus feet of Govinda, though I be unable to do it. Why should he waste time with petty family problems when he held answers to the problems of India and the world? As a knower of Bhagavad Gita, he felt that his first obligation was to offer solutions to the complex crisis of war, hunger, immorality, crime, all symptoms of godlessness. And if dedicating himself to such work meant that other lesser responsibilities suffered, then there was no loss. In March 1952, Abhay published another issue of Back to Godhead. It was dedicated mostly to a biographical article Abhay had written about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and his father Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura. He, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, vehemently protested against the principles of those pseudo-transcendentalists now passed in the name of Lord Chaitanya. He initiated the reformatory movement by literary contributions while he still engaged as a high government officer. During his household life and serving as a magistrate, he wrote books of various descriptions in Bengali, English, Sanskrit, and etc. to present as an actual picture of pure devotional activities to Lord Chaitanya. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj got inspiration from his very childhood all about Srila Thakur Bhaktivinoda's movement. He worked as the private secretary of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and as such, Bhaktivinoda Thakur gave him Srila Saraswati Thakur the transcendental power of attorney to espouse the cause of Lord Chaitanya. And so after Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's departure, Srila Saraswati Thakur took up reins of that reformatory movement. Absorbed in producing his monthly journal, Abhay went about his other activities only superficially. Sometimes he traveled on business or taking the night train from Allahabad to Calcutta, visited his family. When his compartment was not crowded, he would turn on a light while others slept. Riding a night train provided a good opportunity to think or even write. Sometimes he would sleep for a few hours and then sit up again and look out the window to see only night and the reflected lights of the train compartment shining back at him, the windows reflecting his face. Halfway through the 12-hour journey, the sky would lighten, turning from gray to light blue, and the first white clouds would appear in the sky. He could see lights in the towns and hear the train's horn warning. When the train slowed and stopped at the station, tea vendors would walk alongside the train without yelling, "Chai, chai, chai." Their loud sing-song din filling the ears with chai, and chai filling the air with its aroma as hundreds of passengers sipped their morning tea. During his more than 20 years of extensive train travel, Abhay had noticed more and more people smoking cigarettes and more women traveling alone. India was becoming westernized, and the national leaders were paving the way, the blind leading the blind. They wanted the kingdom of God without God. They wanted a progressive, industrialized India without Krishna. From the windows, he could see large fields being left uncultivated, and yet people were hungry. Abhay would sometimes read a newspaper and cut out an article that seemed to warrant a reply to back to Godhead, or that sparked an idea for an essay. He would deliberate over how to approach people for assistance, whom to approach, and how to start a society of Krishna consciousness devotees. People not only in India but all over the world could take to Krishna consciousness. The Chaitanya Bhagavata had predicted that the name of Lord Chaitanya would one day be known in every town and village. Sri Bhaktisiddhanta had wanted that. He had sent preachers to England, but they had only gained a protocol visit with the royalty, stood in line, bowed before the crown, and then come back to India without affecting any change in the Western world people. Abhay thought about sending back to Godhead abroad. His agents, Thacker, Spink, and company, had contacts in America and Europe. People read English all over the world, and some of them would surely appreciate the ideas from Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. This was what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had wanted. Krishna consciousness was not for India alone. It was India's greatest gift, and it was for everyone. Chapter 7, Jhansi, the League of Devotees. Wanted candidates from any nationality to qualify themselves as real Brahmins for preaching the teachings of Bhagavad Gita for all the practical purposes throughout the whole world. Deserving candidates will be provided with free boarding and lodging. Apply. A.C. Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary of League of Devotees, Bharati Bhagavan, P.O., Jhansi, UP. Abhay Charande. It was another 12-hour ride with dozens of stops, the trains rattling and chattering, and its rocking from side to side made writing difficult, but Abhay, crowded on the wooden bench with other third-class passengers, kept writing. With a dingy compartment, passengers eyed one another complacently, and soot and dust blew in the open windows as the train sped along. Outside was a monotonous embankment of loose stones. Bright violet trumpet flowers bloomed on tall stalks of the shallow trackside ditches. Water buffalo and oxen gazed at it in the distance or sometimes pulled a plow before a solitary farmer. Abhi was going to Nancy, not for business, but for preaching. 1 month before, in October of 1952, when Abhay had visited Jhansi for business, Mr. Dubey, a customer and the owner of Jhansi Hospital, had invited him to lecture at the Gita Mandir. Many Jhansi people appreciate things religious and humanitarian, whether from Vaishnavas, Theosophists, Mayavadis, politicians, or whatever. They regarded almost any path as dharma, as long as it showed some edifying piety or tended towards the public welfare. Mr. Dubai had read with interest several issues of Back to Godhead and had therefore requested Abhay to speak. Abhay had been eager, and he had found keen interest among the audience of more than 100 people, many of them young medical students and graduates from the local Ayurvedic college. Abhay was 56, and his commanding presentation of Krishna consciousness had impressed the young, religious-minded people of Jhansi. 25-year-old Prabhakar Mishra, a principal of the Vedanta Sanskrit College and head medical officer of the Jhansi Ayurvedic University, saw that Abhay was very forceful in his desire to spread Krishna consciousness. Dr. Mishra regarded him as a kind of guru, although dressed in white. Here is a humble person, he thought, a real sadhu. Short and stocky, Dr. Shastri, just beginning his career in Ayurvedic medicine, was an active young man, fascinated by Abhay's purity and his vision of a world movement for distributing India's culture. Older men like tall, suave Ramcharan, Hairan Mitra, a utensil shopkeeper who wrote poetry and wore a white Nehru cap, also wanted to learn more about Lord Chaitanya from Abhay. Dr. Mulek, who was the Gita Mandir secretary, and Dr. Siddhi from the university, along with their wives, had sincerely approached Abhay after his talk and asked him, please, to visit Jhansi again. Abhay had come to learn to them not as a pharmaceutical salesman or as a man with family concern, but purely as a devotee of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Although the specific application of Krishna consciousness as given by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati were new to his audience, these teachings had interested them. And the more he had expressed these teachings and spoken of his ambitions to for spreading Krishna's message, the more his hearers had encouraged him. Several of them had suggested the conduct of his mission in Jhansi, and I had promised to help him. Dr. Shastri had even invited Abhay to come live with him. He would introduce Abhay to important citizens and arrange for lectures in the various meeting places of Jhansi. After staying for 10 days, Abhay had returned to Allahabad, but remembering Jhansi, he had been unable to concentrate on his business. Something more important was on his mind, the need for an association of devotees, propagating the teachings and practices of Krishna consciousness worldwide. With the Gaudiya Mass now broken into permanent schism, his godbrothers conducting their own private ashramas in separate locales, apparently impervious to any reconciliations, something would have to be done if the overwhelming atmosphere of godlessness were to be corrected. There must emerge, as Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had envisioned, a league of preachers with activities worldwide. The nations of the world had sought unity through the League of Nations. And recently through the United Nations. The League had failed, and so would the United Nations unless it recognized the true spiritual unity and equality of all living beings in terms of their intimate relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Abhay did not expect any good to come out of such organizations. Though they wanted peace and unity, their attempts were simply another feature of godlessness. No, creating peace and unity was the duty of Vaishnavas. So Abhay had been thinking that perhaps a likely place to start an organization of devotees would be Jhansi. It wasn't a major city, but at least he had found concerned people. The students had listened and accepted and had said they would help. Abhay had sensed a certain lack of sincerity and depth in their appreciation and sentimentality that made him doubt their seriousness. But if he could find a few or even one who was serious, then he would have a beginning. He wanted to preach. That was his mission. Besides, he was already getting older. If something were to begin, it should be now. So he would go to Jhansi again to stay for an indefinite duration. Without much concern for his Allahabad affairs, Abhay left his pharmaceutical business with his son and nephew, informing them that he was going to Jhansi. As the train pulled into the station, Abhay saw Dr. Shastri waving energetically. They rode together by Tanga to Dr. Shastri's dispensary, and the talkative, effusive doctor promised many preaching opportunities and interviews. Dr. Shastri also spoke to the lore of Jhansi, the site of the present city and formerly being a part of the forest in which Lord Ramachandra had practiced austerities many thousands of years ago. The Pandavas had lived here during their exile, and since then many great Vedic sages had had their hermitages in the area. Jhansi had also been the home of an Indian heroine, Lakshmi Bai, who in the mid-19th century had taken part in starting the Indian independence movement against the British regime. Statues and pictures of Lakshmi Bai riding a horse and holding a sword in her upraised hand were displayed throughout the town, but the Jhansi of 1952 was a crowded, poor city with dirt streets and minimal technological amenities. Dr. Shastri lived alone in a two-story rented building in Jhansi's Sipri Bazaar. On the first floor, he had his clinic, and upstairs his one-room residence, which he had offered to share with Abhay. The young but influential doctor was a good person to introduce Abhay to receptive citizens of Jhansi, and he was eager to do so. Outgoing and energetic, he moved easily among the people of his town. He was respectful towards Abhay, who was twice his age, and whom he appreciated as being firmly fixed in the Vaishnava philosophy and the way of life. Dr. Shastri saw it as his duty to help Abhay, and he gladly introduced Abhay to others and arranged for lectures. Abhay and Dr. Shastri would cook and eat together like family members. Abhay revealed his idea for a League of Devotees, an organization with worldwide scope but based in Jhansi. The citizens of Jhansi, he said, should all take part in helping spread Lord Krishna's mission. Lord Chaitanya had said that Indians have a special responsibility to distribute God consciousness, both in India and around the world. Dr. Sastri, in his heart, always it was burning that the whole world was suffering in the materialistic view. Everyone is busy in eat, drink, and be merry. So the whole day he was touring and preaching his mission that was prescribed by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his Guru Maharaj. He was having iron-willed determination and self-confidence about his mission. He was not doubtful at all. He was Dhritavrata, staunchly determined. Actually, he was always preaching. Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Namaiva, Kevalam, Kalau Nasti Eva Nasti Eva Gatir Anyatha. No other way except Hare Krishna Nama. So always discussing, sometimes the whole night he was discussing with me, and sometimes I was fed up. I was requesting, please don't disturb me, please let me sleep. And he, the old man, missionary worker, he was just like a young man. I was a young chap, and he was just like my friend, my elder brother. He was like my guide and teacher, because the preacher is a friend, philosopher, and a guide. He was always typing to create a good atmosphere through Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. The whole Bhagavad Gita was his practical life. His mission was not a mission of preaching only, but of practical action. He was also trying to catch me for his mission, and I would try to slip away. I did not think that he would do any miracle for spiritual revolution of the world, although that is what he urged us. While Dr. Shastri tended his clinic, Abhay sat and spoke with patients, occasionally recommending medicines, but mostly preaching. For now, he was content to live and preach in Jhansi. Here was life, people receptive to his preaching, who responded to his urging them to chant Hare Krishna. His desire and determination to leave everything else behind and preach day and night, depending on Krishna for the result, were increasing. He began regularly lecturing and chanting at various programs in the city, sometimes at several in one day. On Sundays, he would lecture at Sadhana Mandir, another day at the Gita Mandir, another day at the Theosophical Society, and regularly in people's homes. Mr. Ram Mitra, a shopkeeper poet, maintained a Shiva temple near his home, and Abhay began to perform kirtana and lecture there. Sometimes Mr. Mitra would speak in Hindi on Bhagavad Gita at Sadhana Mandir, and Abhay would attend. Sometimes Abhay would visit Mr. Mitra at his utensil shop. The shop was in the crowded Jhansi Bazaar and opened onto the busy street. Abhay would sit down like an ordinary customer amid stacks of stainless steel buckets, plates, bowls, and lotus, and speak to Mr. Mitra and friends about Chaitanya Charitamrita. Or sometimes he will listen to Mr. Mitra tell about his published book of poetry and his literary reputation. Mr. Mitra saw that Abhay's ambition was no less than to make the whole city of Jhansi alive with Krishna consciousness. Abhay quoted Chaitanya Charitamrita, one who has received the great fortune of taking birth in India should make his life perfect and then do good for others by spreading Krishna consciousness. And Abhay would add, the whole world is waiting, Mr. Mitra, for our spiritual revolution. Mr. Mitra would nod, his handsome Nehru-like face forming a smile. But he saw that Abhay wanted people to do more than merely listen to him. He wanted them to do something. Once Mr. Mitra offered Abhay a copy of his book, showing him the foreword by a famous man, and repeatedly mentioned that the great Sadhu, Vinoma Bhave, had liked the poems very much. When Mr. Mitra learned that Abhay was a regular milk drinker, he began offering Abhay fresh milk daily from his cow, Black Cow. And black cows, Mr. Mitra said, have especially good milk. Abhay invited Mr. Mitra to accompany him on foot to nearby villages along with a Kirtana party for preaching. But Mr. Mitra declined, being unable to get anyone to tend the shop for him. Another young Ayurvedic doctor was Dr. Siddhi, who immediately expressed interest in Abhay's enthusiastic plans for spreading Krishna consciousness. Dr. Siddhi, he came several times to my place. I've got a kirtana room on my roof, and he performed kirtana there as well as at the Gita Mandir. We were also going daily to Theosophical Society. There was an atmosphere, a very pious, sacred, and calm atmosphere when the kirtana and the preaching and the lectures were performed. He used to play harmonium. We accompanied him for meeting people and preaching his mission. The main thing was to perform kirtana and give a lecture on the Bhagavad Gita and the life of Krishna. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was his Lord, and I also loved him. Radhalal Mulik, secretary of Gita Mandir and Sadhana Mandir, began meeting often with Abhay. Radhalal Mulik, I was very much influenced by him. I used to spend 3 or 4 hours every morning in his association. He had many, many big scriptures. He was mainly concerned about the books about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He was also writing at that time. The president of Gita Mandir and I both volunteered to cook for him. It was during a morning walk with Radhilal Mulik and that Abhay first spotted the Bhararati Bhavan, a picturesque temple complex across from the large Antia pond. The neighborhood known as Antia Tal was quiet and sparsely populated, but it was near Sipri Road, the main thoroughfare between downtown Jhansi and Sipri Bazaar. Abhay inquired from Mr. Mulik about the temple, and together they turned from the main road and walked down a sloping footpath that led through the main gates of the compound. They found several secluded acres nestled within a grove of neem and mango trees. The main structure was the Radha Memorial. It was small like a chapel, but its proportions were stout and bold. Sitting on an octagonal stone base, it rose to 8 ornate pillars of red and white chipped marble to a stone dome on top. 2 elephants bearing the goddess of fortune Lakshmi on their upraised trunks decorated the entrance. Concrete bunting and striped patterns of red, green, and blue added to the decorative yet massive effect. The entrance was marked with words Radha Smara carved in Hindi script, and above it the English translation Radha Memorial. When Abhay saw the Sanskrit inscription across the side of the stone temple, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hari Hari, he turned to Radhalal Mulik and said strongly, "The Lord has built this building for my use." From that moment, Abhay was determined to have the building. Mr. Mulik explained that the temple had been built in 1939 as a memorial to the wealthy Vaishnava landowner, Radha Bhai, but at the present was not in use. Dr. Prabhakar Mishra, whom Abhay had already met on several occasions, was occupying some of the rooms, but otherwise it was deserted. Mr. Mulik and Abhay sought Dr. Mishra in his quarters in the main building, and when Dr. Mishra saw Abhay's enthusiasm, he invited Abhay to stay there with him. Dr. Mishra confirmed that except for his Sunday morning Gita class, the facility was sitting idle, and he welcomed Abhay to carry on his writing and preaching there. Abhay liked the idea. Immediately he began thinking of uses for the buildings, surveying the land with increasing interest. A second larger building, also with stone pillars and facades, held a hold and 5 rooms. Abhay made mental plans for each room. In this room, kirtanas and lectures with large gatherings. In this room, the deity and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In this room, residents, brahmacharis, and sannyasis. Guests here, an office there, the printing press here. There was even land for grazing a cow. It was a self-contained unit. Hundreds of people could come here for kirtana, prasadam, and discourses. Preachers would go out from here distributing back to Godhead magazines. Some could even go abroad with Lord Chaitanya's message. As Abhay and his companions walked through the compound, appreciating it as a suitable place to start an ashrama, his companions encouraged him, saying they were sure that Mr. Reva Sankar Bhayal, the agent who handed all the properties of Radhabai's descendants, would have no objection to Abhai's living there. Why couldn't the landlord give him the buildings? Abhai asked. They were simply going to waste. If it were actually to be a memorial to Radha, it should be used in Krishna's service, since Krishna is Radha's worshipable god. Abhay was determined and his friends agreed to help him. First, they met with Lilamrta, who said that he was such a close friend of Mr. Bhayal's that Mr. Bhayal would probably give the place simply at his request. Dr. Shastri said that he also wanted to go to impress upon Mr. Bhayal how much the people of Jhansi wanted Abhay to have this place. When Riva Shankar Bhayal met with his friend Ram Mitra, also present were Abhay, Dr. Shastri, Rajalal Mulik, Prabhakar Mishra, and Suryamukhi Sharma, a young educated Jhansi woman. They presented the case from several angles, and Mr. Bhayal listened. He agreed that he wasn't using the place at present, and this seemed to be a good cause. He agreed to let Abhay use the facilities for his League of Devotees for as long as he liked. And at Abhay's request, he agreed to become a member of the League. They shook hands on behalf of the estate. Mr. Bhayal presented the Bharati Bhavan properties in charity to Abhay Charande and the League of Devotees. During December and January, Abhay prepared the League Devotees Charter. He wanted to begin vigorous, extensive preaching, following the example of his spiritual master. Once he began to set his goal onto paper, the project immediately began to expand beyond Jhansi, beyond India. Of course, the League of Devotees was for the young people of Jhansi. They were already expressing the great interest, but Abhay's charter described more than merely evening classes and kirtana. It was a broad scheme, including a description of the 4 orders of society, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra, and detailed plans to accommodate a worldwide religious movement. The charter set forth a probationary period for prospective members. It described spiritual initiation. It arranged for economic reciprocation between individual members of the League. It arranged to provide lodgings for preachers, and it defined prohibited activities, illegitimate connection with women, intoxicating habit, diets other than regulated strictly on vegetable kingdom, gambling, and unnecessary supporting of recreation enterprises. To establish his league with the registrar of Lucknow, Abhay required a memorandum of association signed by the league members. In this document, which was to list the objectives of the society, Abhay expressed his vision for the continuation of his spiritual master's mission. Like his god brothers, who had created new mathas after the dissolution of the Gaudiya Math, Abhay was forming a new branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya to be called the League of Devotees. He was not simply claiming proprietorship of a new building. He was establishing a Krishna-conscious society that would expand into a world movement. His intentions were clearly not insular, but were directed towards creating centers for spiritual development all over the world. Abhay wrote, Lord Chaitanya revealed the transcendental process of approaching the absolute Godhead. And in his teachings, nothing appears to be absurd from the point of human reasoning, and nothing against any religion as accepted by the human and civilized world. In enumerating the League's goals, he included the opening of centers in all parts of the world, thus establishing the League as an international organization for spiritual developments through education culture, as also by recruiting members from all nations, creeds, and castes. The League would publish literature in many languages and print a monthly magazine, Back to Godhead. Abhay obtained the necessary signatures for his memorandum of association. Then he took the train to Lucknow and on February 4th paid the deposit of 50 rupees and filed his application. He returned to Jhansi. In his room in the Radha Memorial, Abhay would rise daily at 4 a.m. and arouse his young neighbor, Prabhaka Mishra. From 4 to 5, Abhay would ride. At 5, he would walk in the Antiatal area. At 5:30, bathe and then chant Hare Krishna on his beads until 7. Then he would hold a class on the Chaitanya Charitamrita or Srimad Bhagavatam, although Prabhupada Mishra was usually the only listener. At 8, he would return to his literary work, typing until after 10, when he would begin to prepare a meal. In the afternoon, he would often go around Jhansi, meeting people and preaching, looking for anyone willing to take part in the League of Devotees. In the early evening, he would write until 7. When he would prepare for the kirtana and lecture, he would hold at one of various places in the city, depending on where he was invited. Although Abhay had no money for continuing back to Godhead, a well-established part of his preaching was to write essays, regardless of whether they were to be immediately published or not. He wrote a long essay, some 24,000 words, entitled Message to Godhead. He also wrote a series of chapters propounding the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, especially as they apply to world problems, and Science of Devotion, a summary study of Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. On May 16, 1953, Abhay held grand opening celebration for the League of Devotees, with continuous readings, kirtana, and prasadam distribution from early mornings until night. The buildings were decorated with leaves, flowers, and many earthen water pots. In the evening, when attendance was greatest, Abhay lectured from the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita on Rajaguya Yoga. Prabhupada Mishra conducted a fire sacrifice, and several brahmanas chanted mantras from Brahma Samrita. Guests received a 16-page prospectus containing Abhay's essay on the need for the League and an excerpt from the chapter explaining its goals. It was signed Om Tat Sat, Abhay Charanavindo, Bhaktivedanta founder and secretary. The opening was a pleasant, auspicious event for the people of Jhansi, and hundreds gathered in the evening for Abhay's lecture. Dr. Sharma, a charter member of the League, and editor of Jhansi Daily newspaper, had already publicized the event and was planning a write-up for the following day. The Gaudiya Patrika also reported on the opening. The editor of the local Theosophical Society, Srila Shimayan Rajapali, was also present, although he holds different philosophical opinions than from Bhaktivedanta Prabhu. He's very sympathetic with his movement. In the assembly, there were many people worth mentioning. The inauguration and establishing of deities will be done soon. The assembly will request Rajapati Shri K.M. Munshi to perform the inauguration ceremony. Their center has been registered by the Society's Registration Act. Shri Bharati Bhavan is the name of the league's building, in which they have a lecture hall and a temple that resembles a palace. The assembly has many activities at the center, and there are also facilities for members to live there. Abhay felt confident that the Bharati Bhavan would now be established and recognized as the home of the League of Devotees. He was happy to see that the opening day was not merely his private affair, but an event celebrated by the most important citizens of Jhansi. His past life was seeming further and further behind him each day. But one day after he had been in Jhansi about 6 months, the telegram arrived, bringing a startling reminder of his past connections. His business in Allahabad had been burglarized. His servants had stolen his money and medicine and anything else of value. It had been loss of 7,000 rupees. Abhay read the news, laughed, and uttered the Bhagavan verse. Yasyaham anugrami harishya tadhanam shanai tatodhanam tyajanti asya svajnana dukha duhitram. Prahamisha advised Abhay to go back to Allahabad to recover what he could. No, Abhay said, this is good for me. I was sad, but now one great attachment has come to an end, and my life is fully surrendered and dedicated to Shri Shri Radha Madhava. Abhay's son Brindaban soon arrived in Jhansi, requesting Abhay to come to Calcutta to revive the business. Abhay Charan, De and Sons. As they sat together in the Abhay's room at the Radha Memorial, Abhay explained that he could not go back. He requested Brindaban to stay and assist him by doing typewriting, but Brindaban returned to Calcutta. From his first meeting with Prabhaka, Abhay had urged the younger, educated man to take part in the League of Devotees as full-time assistant. Although as lecturer and medical officer, Prabhaka had many duties at the university. He helped as much as he felt he could. He soon became Abhay's most active assistant. Abhay appointed him secretary to the League and after several months initiated him. Thus Abhay became Prabhakar's spiritual master, and Prabhakar became Abhay's first disciple. As a preacher, Abhay was duty-bound to accept disciples, giving them the Hare Krishna mantra and the Parampara instructions as he had received them from his spiritual master. Prabhakar, however, not being a completely standard disciple, remained independent, more like an assistant than a disciple. As university principal, Sanskrit scholar, and medical doctor, he continued to pursue his own interests also. Srila Prabhupada, that league of devotees, I was alone. There were some students, but they were not so active. I was doing everything. I wanted to organize with Prabhupada Mishra and others, but they were not interested to devote their whole time. If you asked him to do full-time work, that he'd not do, but he was initiated. They were all learned scholars in Sanskrit, medical men. Thus, when Gaudiya Patrika had reported the opening day ceremonies, it had referred to Prabhakar in honorable terms and as Abhay's partner in the League of Devotees, although he was actually Srila Bhaktivedanta's initiated disciple. Bhaktivedanta Prabhu summoned the service of the Honorable Acharya Srimad Prabhakar Mishra Sastri Kavya, poetry, Vyakarana, grammar, Vedanta, philosophy, Tirtha, Bis Musa, to perform the sacrifice. He is the principal of a college in which the Vedas and the Vedangas are taught and degrees are given. He is also the assistant manager of the League of Devotees. According to time and circumstances, Abhay was engaging this young man in devotional service. Abhay was interested not in collecting disciples, but in establishing the League of Devotees. And for that, he needed assistance. Prabhupada Mishra, when I was When I first met Swamiji, he said to me, "You are a Brahmana and a Prabhaka, and you are eating in a restaurant. You come with me. I will feed you myself, and I will cook." So he would prepare prasadam and offer it to the Lord. He would take Bhavad prasadam together. In this way, by his mercy, I got the chance to take prasadam. He also said to me, "You become Kesha in shaven." So I went with shaven head to the college where I taught, and everyone laughed at me. When I told Swamiji the station, he said, "Since you are a medical officer, you can grow out your hair." When I took Diksha, Swamiji gave me my name, Acharya Pravakar. My original name was Pravakar Mishra. So he said, "You don't write the Mishra, you are Acharya Pravakar." He gave me the name and offered me a Tulasi Mala and put tilaka on my forehead and tied the Kanti Mala around my neck. He had registered the foundation of the League of Devotees, and he appointed me as his secretary for the preaching throughout the world. He used to go to villages for Sankirtana and Bhagavad Gita Katha continuously. Abhay started Sankirtana movement in Jhansi. At first accompanied by only Acharya Prabhakar, he used to walk about the neighborhood of Nayabhasti, chanting Hare Krishna. As he continued this practice, his group gradually increased until 50 people were gathering regularly to go out on parikrama, chant together, and visit temples. Afterwards, they would gather at the Radha Memorial for an evening lecture. When Abhay would go to preach in the nearby villages, he would usually be accompanied by whatever league members were free. Once he went with Acharya Prabhakar on Padayatra, traveling on foot and preaching to Hirgaon, some 20 miles from Jhansi. In Hirgaon, there lived a nationally known poet, Maithili Saran Gupta, who received Abhay and his disciple at his home for dinner. Abhay told his host that since he was an accomplished poet, he should write something glorifying Krishna, and the poet agreed. After preaching in Hirgaon, Abhay and Prabhakar returned to Jhansi, spending one day in each of 5 villages along the way. At night, the villagers would gather and Albany would lead Kirtana. He explained to Pravaka that although most of these simple farmers were not scholars in Bhagavad Gita or Bhagavatam, they could achieve the highest spiritual benefit simply by Kirtana. Abhay was well received by the villagers, who begged him to return soon, but to give them notice next time so they could prepare a proper reception. While preaching locally, Abhay was simultaneously working to give an international scope to his League of Devotees. He wrote to government agencies asking them to help him expand his genuine educational project. And he also tried to recruit preachers from amongst his friends. He wrote his old college classmate Rupen Mitra in Calcutta, inviting him to join in worldwide missionary activities. My mission desires to train up to 40 trainees, and I have asked help from the government for this useful educational purpose. I want that you may be one of the trainees in this regard, and you can ask Katidakda to join us in this spirit. You will know from the papers sent to you how we live and what we do, and thus you can make up your mind whether it is possible for you to join us. The first thing is that we want to train up some retired men in the Vanaprastha life and some young men in the Brahmacharya life. I have no inclination for the sannyasis life, which is rather difficult job for the fallen people of this age. The so-called sannyasis in red garments have spoiled the good name of such order of life. Abhay also asked Rupen, kindly let me know the charges of these advertisements in the English and vernacular papers of Calcutta. Educational. Wanted candidates from any nationality to to qualify themselves as real Brahmins for preaching the teachings of Bhagavad Gita for all the practical purposes throughout the whole world. Deserving candidates will be provided with free boarding and lodging. Apply. A.C. Bhagdanta, founder and secretary of League of Devotees, Bharat Tibhavan, P.O., Jhansi, UP. Abhay wanted a deed stating that Bharati Bhavan belonged to the League of Devotees. So far, he had only a promise. Thinking of Jhansi as a permanent headquarters, he wanted a written commitment. When he approached Reva Shankar Bhayal for a deed of gifts, Mr. Bhayal gave Abhay a form requesting him to pay 500 rupees to register the buildings. But since Abhay had just suffered a loss of 7,000 rupees in Allahabad and had recently spent 3,000 rupees in his preaching, much of it going towards the opening day festival, he found himself unable to raise even 500 rupees. Acharya Prabhakar, despite his academic position, had very little money and was being subsidized by his parents with 3 rupees a day. Most of Abhai's congregation, especially the students, were in a similar position. Mr. Bahyal's request for 5,000 rupees didn't seem urgent, nor did he say what would happen if Abhay wouldn't pay. But he soon made another request. Mr. Bhai Charan there should buy the Parati Bhavan for 5,000 rupees. Sorry, I just finished.
Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravane Pracharane Nirvishesha Sunyavari Paschata Visatarane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nanda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta. It was disconcerting, the generous gift that had turned into a purchase offer. The people in town were already referring to the property as Abhay Bhaktivedanta Ashram, and the League of Devotees was printed in large letters across the wall of the compound. When pressed by Abhay's friends, Mr. Bayal assured them that Abhay could go on living there, but ultimately he would have to buy. Mr. Bayal said he would give the League of Devotees first consideration and a good price. Abhay worried, not knowing what the landlord would do next. If the League could purchase the property, that would be best, but he had been unable to raise even 500 rupees. 5,000 seemed impossible. Abhay found no strong financial backing from his congregation. His League did not include even a single full-time worker. He did know of one way to raise money, his pharmaceutical business. He still had a small operation being run by his son in Calcutta. Abhay had formerly been earning 3,000 rupees a month. He considered approaching God Brothers for help, but the prospects for earning the money himself seemed much more likely. For 30 years, he had earned money by his pharmaceutical business, and he could do it again for the most worthy cause. When he arrived in Calcutta in the spring of 1954, he was without money. He chose to live with his God Brothers at the Gaudiya Sangha in Chetla, the same neighborhood his family lived in. Since he had no money, the head of the ashram bore his expenses. Abhay gave daily discourses on Srimad Bhagavatam, which the Gaudiya Sangha brahmacharis highly appreciated. Krishna Kumar brahmachari, even after he left, his sweet, melodious voice would ring in my ears. He used to often express desire to go abroad and preach. One of his sons was running a small business, Vimaltone Laboratory, and thus supporting the family. Abhay knew that his wife would not be interested in his work in Jhansi. His son had been there, but had not been impressed. The family would see his preaching in Jhansi as a threat to their home life. Abhay, however, was sustaining himself by his vision, which was now taking practical shape, of a world reformed by Krishna consciousness. He even thought of opening a branch of the League of Devotees in Calcutta. But inevitably, he was plunged again into family responsibilities. Some of his children were still unmarried. Rent and bills had to be paid. Even if he were to develop the Vimaltone Laboratory, the family would demand whatever he earned. And even if he were to accede to their demands, live at home and give up preaching, the greatest difficulty would still remain. They weren't serious about devotional service, nor could he change them. What was the use of conducting a business if they would not be devotees? He visited his family and the same old scene occurred. Local friends came to visit, and Abhay began preaching, giving Bhagavad Gita class, just as he had been doing in Jhansi. Meanwhile, his wife and the rest of the family would take tea in a separate room. Srila Prabhupada says, I wanted as much as possible to get her to work with me in spreading Krishna consciousness, to get her help. But she was very determined. She wouldn't help me in spreading Krishna consciousness. So finally, after many years, I could understand she would not be any assistance to me. She was very attached to drinking tea. I was always telling her not to drink tea because I wanted to have a nice Vaishnava family. So although I was repeatedly telling her, this time I finally said, you have to choose between me or tea. Either the tea goes or I go. In this way, I was even criticizing my own family. But because they were thinking I was the husband or father, they couldn't take my instructions seriously. So she replied, give up tea drinking or give up my husband? Well, I will have to give up my husband then. Of course, she thought I was joking. One day, Radharani made a great mistake. There was a system of barter in which a customer would place on a scale an object a shopkeeper considered valuable, and the shopkeeper would then balance it with an equal weight of merchandise. So while Abai was out, his wife took his worshipable Bhagavatam to the market and traded it for tea and biscuits. When Abai came home and looked for the book, she told him what had happened. She hadn't taken the matter as a very serious thing. She was out of tea biscuits, but Abai was shocked. At first, he felt depressed, but then a wave of absolute resolution passed over him. His family life was finished. When he told them he was leaving, they didn't understand what he meant. He had been leaving for 30 years. He was always coming and going. When he walked out the door, they thought, there he goes again, he's leaving. It was the usual routine. Everyone could see, even the neighbors, Mr. Day was going again. He had been at home, now he was going. He would be back again, but Abai knew he would never come back. Srila Prabhupada says, before leaving my family, I wanted to get all my sons and daughters married, but some of them disagreed. But then the time is up. Never mind whether they're married or not. Let them see to their own business. Suppose I die immediately. Who will take care of my daughter? At that time, we say, God will take care. Then why not now? God will take care. My Guru Maharaj used to say that renunciation of family life was civil suicide. If you commit suicide, that is criminal. But that renunciation of family is voluntarily committing suicide. Now I'm dead. Whatever you like, you do. Krishna says, Sarvadharma Parityajya. Give up all religion. So family is Grihadharma, the religion of the family. But Krishna says, give that up. But that attachment is there. And if we say that feeling of attachment has to be given up gradually, that we cannot do. Because the attachment is there. But if God will take care of them, if I die immediately, then why not now? His spiritual emotions were so turbulent that he wasn't thinking of going to Jhansi. He wanted to take a train to anywhere. Then he remembered some old godbrother friends who were living in an ashram in Jhargram, only a short train ride south of Calcutta. So he borrowed 10 rupees from a friend and bought a ticket to Jhargram. It was a small month. When Abai arrived, he was welcomed by Paramahamsa Maharaj, Damodar Maharaj, and others. Paramahamsa Maharaj had been present when Abai had first met Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and he remembered Abai as he had looked then, dressed in a white cutty, looking like a Gandhian anarchist. Abai explained to him, I couldn't fulfill my family's needs, so now let me preach the message of Lord Chaitanya. Abai told him how his business had failed and how he had willingly left his family and was now destitute. Paramahamsa Maharaj says, when Abai arrived, he appeared very poor, starving. He had no means. He came alone to the mutt. And when he arrived, he only chanted Hare Krishna, nothing else. Abai spent his time in Jhargram, chanting holy name and becoming settled in detachment from his family. For several days, he chanted japa almost continuously. Paramahamsa Maharaj would lecture in the evenings, and then Abai would speak on Bhagavad Gita. But as time passed, his thoughts turned again to Jhansi, and he soon felt ready to go back to the League of Devotees. He had to secure the buildings and go on with the preaching. But before returning, he obtained a large deity of Lord Chaitanya that he had planned to install at Bharati Bhavan. Ironically, he had gone to Calcutta to do business and raise money, But now he had no money, no business, and no family responsibilities. He had been married 36 years, and now at the age of 58, he had fully taken to the Varnaprast order. Now he could dedicate his life fully to preaching Krishna consciousness. Abai did not adopt the saffron dress of a Varnaprast, but continued wearing white dhoti and kurta. The people of Jhansi had always known him as a preacher with no family, ever since he had first arrived a year and a half before. Now he was returning to them with the deity of Lord Chaitanya and a determination to establish Lord Chaitanya's temple in Jhansi. Abai met with a warm welcome from Acharya Prabhakar and others, but he also met with competition for possession of the Radha Memorial. It began with a Sanskrit conference, the Bundelkhand Sanskrit Sammelan, which brought to Jhansi the governor of the province, K.M. Munshi, and his wife Lilamrta, an active organizer. Lilamrta Munshi had opened several branches of the Mahila Samiti Sangha, a society that aimed at socially uplifting women by teaching them secretarial skills and English. Two educated Jhansi ladies, Chandramukhi and Suryamukhi, wanted such a women's social program for Jhansi, and they took the opportunity to approach Lilamrta Munshi during her visit. She inspired them, and they began to talk about where in Jhansi they could open one of her social centers. Perhaps, suggested one of the ladies, the Bharati Bhavan could be used. Although Suryamukhi Sharma had been one of the sympathizers who had first approached Mr. Bayal on behalf of Avaj Rande and had asked that he be given Bharati Bhavan for his League of Devotees, she felt that the ladies' cause was more important, and she knew that Abai's ownership of the buildings was not settled. The women agreed that the building would be an excellent facility for a Mahila Samati Sangha branch, and that their cause was more urgent than Abai Charan's. Suryamukhi assured of support by the governor's wife, called on A.C. Bhaktivedanta. She explained that his League of Worldwide Vaishnavas would never take shape. He was a nice person, and she liked him, but she didn't think he could realize his extraordinary expectations. She suggested he vacate the Bharati Bhavan so that the governor's wife could organize a women's social center. You can go here and there for the sake of building a temple, she told him. You are free to travel anywhere. But these poor women in Jhansi have nothing, so they must be given these buildings for their use. She found him adamantly opposed. No, Abai said, find another building. Abai argued that his work was not just for a section of people, but for all living beings. Suryamukhi felt frustrated. Abai was surprised that a member of the League of Devotees was now working against him, and the maneuver was being backed by the governor's wife. Mrs. Munshi could work at a much more influential level without having to confront Abai directly and without his even knowing what she was doing. After she talked with Mr. Bayal, word got around that Mr. Bayal had been pressured to persuade Abai Charan to relinquish his claim on the Bharati Bhavan. Mr. Bayal owned a cinema house in Jhansi, and there was talk that he could have a lot of difficulty with his operator's license unless Abai Charan vacated the Radha Memorial. In December of 1954, Mrs. Munshi wrote Abai in reference to his failure to raise the 5,000 rupees. Dear Bhaktivedanta Ji, she wrote, you wanted to organize there, but you could not. But I have got this institution, Mahila Samiti. Why not give it to me? Abai was of a mind to resist. He had a lawyer friend who advised him that even though he was opposed by the governor's family, he had a good cause that would stand up well in court. India's tradition of respect for religious buildings was on his side. Abai replied to Mrs. Munshi, introducing himself as the founder of the League of Devotees. He explained the goal of the League, enclosed a copy of his prospectus, and presented many statements by prominent people. Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Sri Sitaram, Raja Mahendra Pratap, and even her husband, Sri K. Munshi, praising the wonderful work of the League of Devotees. He also mentioned that the president of the League had recently received a 100 rupee donation in Mathura from His Excellency the Governor. Mr. Munshi himself, Abai said that although work had been going on slowly but peacefully in Jhansi, his mind had now been bothered by Mrs. Munshi's negotiations. He requested her not to pressure anyone about his occupying the Bharati Bhavan, though he admitted, if you or any one of your agents do try, the pressure will be more weightful. I am a non-entity in that comparison. Abai hoped that by presenting the details of his league, she would understand that his was a better cause than the Mahila Samiti. He quoted the first 3 verses of the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, wherein Lord Krishna describes how the ancient science of Bhakti Yoga is received through parampara, the order of succession from one teacher to the next, and how kings are responsible for seeing that Krishna consciousness spreads for everyone's benefit. He also argued that since, according to Bhagavad Gita, only a few amongst thousands and thousands of men endeavor for self-realization, and since the League of Devotees engaged its members in self-realization, he was providing an important and rare service. He offered to meet with Mrs. Munshi along with some 15 sannyasis from the area and suggested she work cooperatively with them and understand the importance of the League. The League of Devotees was benefiting all classes. As Sri Krishna said in Bhagavad Gita, even one of low birth can attain the shelter of the Supreme Lord. But the Mahila Samati, Abai pointed out, was based on bodily conceptions of caste, creed, color, and sex. Therefore, it could not be as important a cause. Abai closed by requesting Mrs. Munshi not to try to occupy the Radha Memorial, which was already being. He signed A.C. Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary, League of Devotees. Aware that he was involved in an intrigue, Abai organized his thoughts and set down on paper a short history outlining important events surrounding his possession of the Bharati Bhavan. The short history. Number 1, I came to Jhansi sometime in October of 1952. Number 2, I delivered some lectures at Gita Mandir on Gandhi Jayanti Day, 1952. 3, made acquaintance with Prabhupada Shastri. 4, my idea of League of Devotees implemented. 5, he took me to Reva Shankar for Bharati Bhavan. 6, Sri Reva Shankar agreed to hand over the Bharati Bhavan to the League of Devotees, and he agreed to become a member of it in the presence of Prabhakar, Mitraji, and myself. 7, I write letters from Allahabad to confirm. 8, he confirmed my letter on the 10th of December, 1952. Prabhakar, number 9, Prabhakar intimated the desire of a Reva Shankar on January 1st, 1953. 10, I got the document needed for the League of Devotees and came to Jhansi for signature of the members. Reva Shankar signed and agreed to become an executive member. 11, the document was submitted for registration on the 4th of February, 1953 at Lucknow and returned on October 10th, 1953. 12, the League of Devotees ceremoniously started on the 16th of May, 1953, and work began. So I am occupying the building since then and continuing my work. Abai went on to enumerate more than 30 points, including news, publicity, and congratulations he had received. He listed the story of how he came here sacrificing my business and family. I received a telegram from Allahabad instructing the news of Bulgari by breaking lock. I could not attend the business for work here, and it was closed subsequently at a loss of 7,000 rupees. Abai thought of turning to some of his sannyasi godbrothers for help. If he or they could purchase the buildings, his competitors would be silenced. He thought it worthwhile to interest his godbrothers in purchasing the building as an adjunct to their own missions. Vrindavan was not far away, a 4-hour train ride to Mathura, and then a short Tunga ride. He had gone there on pilgrimage in October of 1953 and had even looked at an available room in a temple near Keshigat with the idea of staying there someday. He had also traveled there several other times since he had begun residing in Jhansi. This time he went to the Imlital temple to see his godbrother Bhakti Saranga Goswami and asked if he would like to take over the proprietorship of the Bharati Bhavan so that it might be used for preaching Krishna consciousness according to the teachings of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. But Bhakti Saranga Goswami was not interested. After approaching another godbrother, Damodar Maharaj, who was also not interested in Jhansi, Abai took short Tunga ride back to Mathura to see another godbrother, Keshava Maharaj. Keshava Maharaj was in Mathura with a group of his disciples to establish the center, but he had not yet located a suitable place. So when Abai told him about the buildings in Jhansi, he was interested. Abai and Keshava Maharaj composed a letter to Mr. Bayal presenting their requests and the aims of their movement, and then traveled to Jhansi in a group. Abai and Keshava Maharaj with his disciples. Keshava Maharaj and his party stayed for several days in Jhansi, holding kirtans and lectures. They had an appointment with Reva Sankar Bayal, but Mr. Bayal broke it, so they had to wait to see him on another day. Meanwhile, Keshava Maharaj had time to form an opinion of Jhansi and discuss with Abai the likelihood of making this his headquarters. He noted that the people were receptive, but the location was too remote. Even before meeting with Mr. Bayal, Keshava Maharaj felt reluctant to stake his whole mission in Jhansi. Abai agreed, aware that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had said that a preacher should go into the big cities and not practice his bhajan in seclusion. And he admitted that after 2 years in Jhansi, he had made no full-time followers. When they finally met with Mr. Bayal failed to present clear terms for purchasing the property. He said they were eligible to buy it, but he made their use of the building conditional. He wanted to have a say in the nature of the programs they would hold. Abai knew that this was just a further sign of shady dealings, and he suspected that Mr. Bayal was under mounting pressure to give the buildings over to Mahila Samiti. Keshava Maharaj, having lost all interest, decided to go back to Mathura, and he invited Abai to join him. But Abai remained. Mr. Bayal wanted him out, and he even returned Abai's deposit of 210 rupees, claiming that Abai had no justification for residing at the Bharati Bhavan. Abai noted down the latest events in his short history. Number 29. He has also given me a check for 210 rupees in lieu of my deposit money with him, but he has no money in the bank. The bank has returned it with remark. 30. The money which was given to him was misappropriated by him for his own purpose, and now he has given a false check with an arrangement with the bank. 31. It is plain cheating to me from beginning to end. 32. I must be compensated for all the money before I can leave the buildings. But he saw it as the inscrutable will of Krishna. Events and opinions were turning him against conducting a mission in Jhansi. It no longer seemed auspicious. Srila Prabhupada says, I wanted to start from there. It was a nice big house. It was not given to me rightly, but I was using. So somehow or other, she got imagination that this house is very nice. She was the governor's wife. Through collector, through government officials, she made pressure. So of course, there were many lawyer friends. They advised me, you do not give up. But I thought, Who's going to litigate? I thought, I've left my home, and now should I take up litigation? No, I don't want this house. Abai remembered how the Gaudiya Math preachers had expended their energy for years in the courts. Having terminated his long entanglement with family and business, he had no taste for a legal fight. He could have fought, but he remembered that Keshav Maharaj had said about Jansi's being out of the way. Of course, the whole thing had just sprung up here. Otherwise, Abai would never have chosen to establish his worldwide league in such an obscure place. The educated young men and women wished him well, just as they had good wishes for the Ladies' League. The Theosophy Society, the Arya Samaj, and many other causes. But their good intentions were certainly short of pure surrender and devotion. Even his one disciple could offer him only part-time help, but these considerations had not been sufficient to force him out. The real thing was he was being driven out. Srila Prabhupada says, if I did not leave, nobody could drive me. That was a fact. But I thought, who's going to litigate these things? It is the governor's wife, and she is pressing through collector. The manager who is in charge, he had some cinema house, so they had to renew the license. And the collector pressed him that unless you arrange for this house, we're not going to renew your license. I thought unnecessarily, this man will be trouble. I will have to pay many rupees, and she is the governor's wife. He decided to leave. He told his friends to carry on the League of Devotees in his absence. They were sad to see him go, and yet even some of his friends openly praised the work of the Ladies' Society and were glad to see it come. They had not been able to help him financially, although they knew he had been unable to purchase the building on his own. His close followers were more affected, but he assured them that their relationship would continue. He would write letters to them, Acharya Prabhakar, Radhalal Mulik, Mr. Mitra, Dr. Shastri, and he gave them instructions on what they should do, especially Acharya Prabhakar. Abai told him he would be calling for him and expected him to continue as secretary of the League of Devotees, even if they didn't make Jansi their main residence. Yet it was obvious that this chapter of making ambitious plans for a world movement, going from house to house and village to village, performing Sankirtan, lecturing on the Gita, distributing prasadam, this was ended. And it was not likely that he would return, or that the residents of Jansi would expect to see him again. When Abai left the Bharti Bhavan, with its 6-foot-high lettering, League of Devotees, painted across the outside wall, he felt sad. It had been a natural, spontaneous success for him. The young, educated people of Jansi had looked up to him from the start, and had it not been for the intrigue, he would never have left. But he felt he had no real choice. He had come as a family man on business and was leaving as a homeless Varnapras, forced to take shelter of Krishna. His plans were uncertain, but his desire was strong and his health was good. So he moved on to Mathura, carrying with him the deity of Lord Chaitanya. Chapter 8, New Delhi, crying alone in the wilderness. I have got the clue of going back to Godhead just after leaving my present material body. And in order to take along with me all my contemporary men and women of the world, I have started my paper, Back to Godhead, as one of the means to the way. Please don't think of me as something wonderful or a madman when I say I shall go back to Godhead after leaving my present material body. It is quite possible for everyone and all of us. From a letter to India's president, Mr. Rajendra Prasad. When Abai arrived in Mathura, he sought out Keshav Maharaj, who was now establishing his mutt, and presented him with the deity of Lord Chaitanya. At Keshav Maharaj's request, Abai agreed to stay there and edit the Gaudiya Patrika. Abai was given a room, and for the first time, aside from brief visits, he lived in a mutt with his godbrothers. As a senior experienced devotee, Abai held classes and instructed the brahmacharis who were young, uneducated, and even illiterate in the disciplines of devotional service and the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. He had only recently begun his studies when Bhakti Saranga Goswami, another sannyas godbrother, asked Bhaktivedanta Prabhu to assist him in New Delhi at his ashram, Gaudiya Sangha. Both Keshava Maharaj and Bhakti Saranga Goswami recognized Abai as an accomplished writer and editor and wanted to work with him. It was accepted among Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's disciples that A.C. Bhaktivedanta Prabhu was an expert preacher and writer, whether in English, Hindi, or Bengali. Now, Keshava Maharaj wanted Abai to stay and work on the Gaudiya Patrika. Well, Bhakti Saranga Maharaj, who had to go to Bengal, was requesting him to come to Delhi to produce the Harmonist, known in Hindi as Sajanatoshini. Abai was agreeable to Bhakti Saranga Goswami's proposition, and Keshava Maharaj consented on the condition that Abai also continue to edit the Gaudiya Patrika, at least by mail. As an editor, Abai was in his element, and he was happy to preach in cooperation with his godbrothers. Although Abai didn't consider himself an accomplished scholar or author, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had been pleased by his writings and had encouraged him to continue, and now these senior sannyasis of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati were turning to him for help. They were practically competing to see who would get the benefit of his services. Perhaps Abai thought this should be his life's work, serving humbly under the direction of his godbrothers. His ejection from Jhansi had been kind of a setback. At least it had left him temporarily unsure of how Krishna wanted to use him. But now his godbrothers seemed to be answering the question. Living and working in an ashram with brahmacharis and sannyasis was a way of life Abai had once considered too austere. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had remarked, better he live outside your company. But now he would either have to struggle alone with nothing or stay within the shelter of a friendly portion of the Gaudiya Math. Perhaps he could carry out his desires to preach Krishna consciousness within the ashrams of his godbrothers. Since he would soon be the editor of Sajanatoshini, he began thinking of how to expand it. It was a scholarly Vaishnava journal, but cheaply produced and with very limited circulation. He envisioned it surpassing India's slick Illustrated Weekly. It should be more popular than Time or Life magazines of America. And why not? Krishna was no poor man. Abai thought of how he could start an ambitious subscription program by approaching the many prominent and wealthy men of New Delhi. Then, by Krishna's grace, he would soon be able to print color photos and use high-quality paper for Sajanatoshini. He would give it his best effort, depending on Krishna. And while soliciting subscribers, he could take his book manuscripts and try to get them published by Dr. Alagappa in South India. Had wanted to publish his Gita-upanishad, no doubt. There were many men like him. Or perhaps Bhakti Saranga Goswami would be willing to publish Abai's works with funds from the Gaudiya Sangha. Abai soon received a letter from Bhakti Saranga Goswami's assistant, carefully instructing him how to travel to Delhi at the least expense. He was to travel by train third class to Delhi and from there take a Tanga. Since Tangas at the station get charged too much, Abai should first walk about 100 meters toward the right-hand side of the station, where he would find a cheaper one. Were he to ride alone, he should pay no more than 1 rupee and 12 annas, but he should try to share the Tanga with another passenger. That would be cheaper. Keeping the crematorium to your left-hand side, the assistant instructed him. If you look toward the right, then you will be able to see our red flag and the signboard written in Hindi and English. When you reach here, we will pay for the Tanga. At the Gaudiya Sangha, Abai found a disconcerting state of affairs. In the absence of their guru, Bhakti Saranga Goswami, the brahmacharis were quarreling and shirking their duties, and as a result, the preaching and donation gathering were being neglected. Cleanliness, deity worship, cooking, and even peace among the devotees were below standard. And like most of the monks of his godbrothers, the Gaudiya Sangha was poor. Abai had come thinking he would be editing a magazine, but he found himself contending with a group of quarreling neophyte devotees. He learned that the brahmachari responsible for giving public lectures had not done any preaching. The devotees who had previously been holding kirtans in people's homes were now negligent, and the errand boy refused to run because he had lost his bicycle. Then a brahmachari handed a letter from Bhakti Saranga Goswami requesting him to take up the general management of the month. Inspired everyone to be engaged in service. Otherwise, I do not know how we are going to print the English monthly magazine. Since we don't have much money in the fund, and since the brahmacharis are quite careless, Akinchan Maharaj wrote that he is unable to take the responsibility of management. It will be very nice if you could keep your eyes on these affairs. And Abai found other obstacles in trying to produce Sajjana Toshini, no typewriter, and bad relations with the printer. In a few days, Abai received another letter from Bhakti Saranga Goswami telling him what articles to print, cautioning him not to change essential elements of the magazine, and reminding him of his special duty. I have asked Akinchan Maharaj to hand over the keys of my room to you so that you may use my room only for your office work. As you are there, you should try to maintain peace in the ashram for giving necessary instructions to one and all. Abai saw that he could do no editorial work until the laxity and petty quarreling in the ashram stopped. But when he tried to help Bhakti Saranga Goswami, some of the devotees rebelled and even wrote to their spiritual master complaining. It was against many obstacles that Abai met the publisher's deadline for the August 1955 issue of Sajjana Toshini. Yet, owing to the printer's delay, the magazine did not come out until September. When at last the first copies were delivered, Abai sent several to Bhakti Saranga Goswami in Calcutta, asking for his response. Abai never heard from his brother directly, but received further instructions from Bhakti Saranga Goswami's secretary, Ramananda, who pointed out various mistakes in the issue without mentioning whether Bhakti Saranga had been pleased with it. The errors were mostly technical matters of style. Abai had done the contents page in a different way and had not printed Bhakti Saranga Goswami's name as exactly as he wanted it on all his articles. Regarding Abai's request for a typewriter, Ramananda wrote that if the matters are distinctly written, there is no necessity of them being given to the printer in typewriting. Abai wrote to Bhakti Saranga Goswami asking him to return to Delhi and establish a peaceful atmosphere in the month. Regarding Sajjana Toshini, Bhakti Saranga Goswami had suggested that the paper for the cover be improved and that the whole magazine be done on nicer paper by an up-to-date press. And Abai agreed, but improvements depended on money. The suggestion that the paper may be printed from Calcutta is all right. My suggestion is that either in Calcutta or in Delhi, we must have our own press with good equipment so that we may be able to broadcast the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in all the important languages, especially in Hindi and in English. Hindi is meant for all Indian propaganda, while English is meant for worldwide propaganda. Abai further reported that since it was almost impossible to expect a printer to work speedily from handwritten manuscripts, he had already rented a typewriter. He also mentioned his ideas for increasing the number of subscribers. Abai's son, Brindaban, came to live with him for a few months at the Gaudiya Sangha. There was no question of Abai's returning to his family, and Brindaban simply associated with his father, following the routines of the month and helping Abai in his duties. One day, a prominent advocate, the president of the Hindu Mahasabha, paid an unexpected visit to the Gaudiya Sangha. The month was mostly deserted, and there was no prasadam on hand, so Abai and Brindaban received the prominent guest, cooking for him, offering him prasadam, and acquainting him with the activities of the Sangha. When Abai wasn't busy managing the disorganized month and working on Gaudiya Patrik and the Sajjana Toshini, he spent his time preparing a Hindi translation of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Although he was more accustomed to writing in English and Bengali, he reasoned that as long as he was preaching in Hindi-speaking areas, such a book would be important. Bhakti Saranga Goswami wrote that he wanted to print only 500 copies of Sajjana Toshini for the September issue. But Abai wanted to print more. After making an agreement with the printer that the charges would be the same for 1,000 copies as for 500, he wrote Bhakti Saranga Goswami informing him of the good news. Abai also told him that he had recently secured a donation of printing paper and that he had arranged for a 1/4 reduction in the postal charges. So why, for the matter of saving some papers, shall we not print the full number? In my opinion, we should print more than 1,000 copies every month and distribute them in large scale. But Bhakti Saranga replied through a brief postcard that they should not print more than 500. Abai continued his attempts to improve Sajjana Toshini. For him, it was not a perfunctory duty, but absorbing preaching. In a letter to Bhakti Saranga Goswami, he expressed anxiety over waiting for him to send articles for the next issue. Funds were scarce, so scarce that Abai had no decent dhoti, and yet he continued to envision a glorious future for Sajjana Toshini. I wish to see this paper just to the standard of Illustrated Weekly with numerous pictures in order to make it very popular literature. And for this, I wish to move myself to secure subscribers as well as advertisers. I wish to visit good businessmen, insurance companies, and government officers in this connection, but I have no proper dress at all. I want 2 sets of good dresses in order to take up this responsibility, and I shall be glad to have your decision on this matter. It is my heart's desire that this paper is improved to the highest elevation. Abai also requested that Bhakti Saranga Goswami help him publish his Hindi Chaitanya Charitamrita. Some non-Bengali gentlemen were demanding the book and had assured Abai that they would pay 25 rupees per volume. Abai requested a loan of 600 rupees under an arrangement suitable to Bhakti Saranga Goswami for publishing the first part of his work. If this part is sold out, Abai wrote, the other parts will automatically come out. But just as life in the Gaudiya Sangha and work on Sajjana Toshini under Bhakti Saranga Goswami's hand produced strain for Abai, Abai's ambitions for increased circulation and his strong editorial opinions also created strain for Bhakti Saranga Goswami. In response to Abai's letter, Bhakti Saranga Goswami's secretary, Ramananda, wrote a letter full of flowery praises of Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, but with the intent of dismissing him from his position with the Gaudiya Sangha. With innumerable humble obeisances at the lotus feet of a Vaishnava, Srimad Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, we received your letter written to Sri Guru Maharaj on the 5th of October, 1955. Your project is very lofty, and you are a well-wisher of our society. We got to know that also. Since the last 2 months, in spite of so many difficulties, the difficulties of prasadam and misunderstanding of the devotees there, and in spite of various other difficulties, the kind of enthusiasm that you have shown that is possible only for an elevated Vaishnava like yourself. You are a favorite Vaishnava of Srila Prabhupada and a friend of all the special associates of Srila Prabhupada. Most of the devotees in Gaudiya Sangha Ashram in Delhi are now new and less respectful. They cannot give proper respect to an elevated personality like yourself, especially the lofty speculations that you have. Our society, at the present circumstances, has little ideas. We hope with all your qualities very soon, you will become settled independently and fulfilling the desires of Srila Prabhupada and start to preach very widely. We are suspecting that it won't be possible for an able and respected Vaishnava like yourself to stay there long, adjusting with illiterate and less educated devotees of the Gaudiya Sangha in Delhi. Moreover, you are the head of the editorial board of Srimad Keshava Maharaj's Vedanta Samiti's Gaudiya Patrik and Bhagavat Patrik. So if you spend much time in our ashram, then he might become annoyed. With many devotees, he is setting out to circumambulate the land of Braj, and we are sure he will need your assistance in his parakram. So you consider all the pros and cons, and if you do not neglect the duty as a leader of this organization, we will be pleased. Some articles have been sent for the October issue of Sajani Toshini, and some more might be sent. We will be very much obliged if you would instruct Keshava Nanda Prabhu to publish the October issue. We hope that Sri Guru Maharaj will be able to personally publish the November and December issues. We wish to transfer it to Calcutta from the month of January. Sri Guru Maharaj has become old, and most of the time he has to depend on us. We are happy to know that you are trying very hard to publish the Chaitanya Charitamrita in Hindi, but at the present circumstances, it won't be possible for us to invest 600 rupees from our fund in order to print that. Because Sri Guru Maharaj has taken up many projects in different directions now, and he has to spend a lot of money, so he can't take the responsibility of printing that book. Keshavananda Prabhu wrote that your clothes are getting torn, so buy a pair of clothes from the fund of the temple. And if the devotees commit offenses at your lotus feet due to their short-sightedness, please forgive them. Signed, the servant of the Vaishnava, Sri Ramananda Das. It was not a fact that Abai was being called for leadership in Keshava Maharaj's parakram, although it was a good excuse for Ramananda's suggesting that Abai leave the Gaudiya Sangha. So after living as a dutiful member in the ashrams of Keshava Maharaj and Bhakti Saranga Maharaj, Abai was again on his own. Without income or institutional shelter, Abai began staying in various homes in Delhi, living from week to week, wherever he received an invitation. In terms of food, clothing, and shelter, these were the most difficult times he had ever gone through. Since his childhood, there had always been plenty of food and good clothes and no question of where he would live. He had been the pet child of his father, and he had received special guidance and affection from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. But now, Abai sometimes felt alone. Homeless, he moved around Delhi from one temporary residence to another, a Vishnu temple, a room at the Kapoor College of Commerce, but he was seeking donors, preaching from Bhagavad Gita, writing. His goal wasn't to find a permanent residence, but to print his transcendental literature and to establish or join forces with a pure, powerful movement for spreading Krishna consciousness. Abai made a list of several books he wanted to publish. Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita in Hindi, 2,000 pages. 2, Gita Upanishad in English, 1,200 pages. 3, Science of Devotion in English, 300 pages. Number 4, Lord Chaitanya's Samkirtan movement in English, 300 pages. 5, Message of Godhead in English, 300. And number 6, Bhagavaner Katha, Bengali. But to print, he needed donors. He called on wealthy men in their offices and homes, presenting his manuscripts and explaining his mission. He had a list of donors, but few responded. And when he did receive a donation, it was usually only 5 or 10 rupees. Occasionally, he would receive a letter of appreciation or endorsement. One appreciation came from Naren Das Rai Bahadur, a retired executive engineer and secretary of the Birla Mandir Trust, who had attended a public reading Abai had held in the presence of a popular guru, Mother Anandamoyi. Impressed by Abai's reading from his Hindi Chaitanya Charitamrita, Mother Anandamoyi had donated 50 rupees and suggested that Abai also visit a well-known sadhu, Sri Hari Baba, who was lying ill in the hospital. Abai, accompanied by Naren Das, had then visited Hari Baba, who had claimed that Abai's reading put him into ecstasy. Meanwhile, Naren Das was becoming inclined to help. And in December, he wrote a letter suggesting that everyone, extend their helping hand for the successful publication of Sri A.C. Bhaktivedanta's various writings in Hindi, English, and Bengali. I wish him all success in his noble attempt. Abai would show this in other such letters to prospective supporters. In Delhi, it was not difficult to see government, ministers, judges, lawyers, business executives, religious heads. There was always someone willing to hear seriously and occasionally to offer support. Thus, Abai, with the 2 dhotis and kurtas the Gaudiya Sangha had supplied him, with his ability to preach and convince, but with little support and no fixed residence, continued his preaching undaunted. Writing and trying to publish was only half his effort. The other half was taking part in efforts for a worldwide movement like the League of Devotees. Through Narayan Das, Abai inquired whether there might be a way he could do his work under the auspices of the Birla Mandir, one of the largest and richest temples in Delhi. Abai proposed that he be put in charge of propaganda in the English language, both within India and abroad. Since Narayan Das considered himself a follower of Sanatan Dharma, Abai wrote to him explaining how the teachings of Bhagavad Gita set forth the real Sanatan Dharma. Abai had many ideas about how Sanatan Dharma, as the eternal religion for all living beings, could be expanded and practically applied if Narayan Das would help him. I want to train up 40 educated youths to learn this science of transcendental knowledge and just prepare them for going to foreign countries for missionary work. To start immediately, an English paper to revive my paper Back to Godhead in the style of Illustrated Weekly of India, to organize a Sankirtan party, which shall not be only of good singers and musicians, but must also be used to practice sadhana, or self-realization. Abai promised that as soon as he had done some groundwork, he, along with man and equipment, could start for foreign countries to propagate his missionary work. But he admitted also that he was externally in dire straits. Kindly do arrange for the above immediately and give me proper place to live. I must remove from this temporary quarter by Monday next latest. The directors of the Birla Mandir did not take Abai up on his offer, but he thought of another way of engaging them. He would hold a public meeting at the Birla Mandir to help generate interest in the League of Devotees. He approached Sri R.N. Agarwal, president of the Delhi Municipal Committee, who, after hearing the names of several respectable people who would be attending, agreed to preside over the meeting. Abai set the date for December 22nd and printed 500 announcements and 200 invitation cards. Striking a cosmopolitan note, he stated in his announcement, "By the grace of the Almighty, Delhi is becoming the center of cultural association of the world." The leaders of both Russia and India had recently pointed to the need for cultural contact between all nations. But the highest culture, Abai suggested, was scientific spiritual knowledge. Therefore, the best cultural resources in the world existed in India. And these resources, Abai stressed, should not be left to the unorganized sadhus and sannyasis, but should be taken up by important members of society in an organized way. The December 22nd Hindu Times listed the meeting of the League of Devotees in the Today's Engagements column, along with announcements for meetings of the Rotary Club, Tagore Society, Indian Council of World Affairs, Bharat Scouts, and the Indian Pharmaceutical Congress. The League's meeting began with a kirtan led by Professor H. Chand, and then A.C. Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary of the League of Devotees, explained his movement's objectives. Then Narayan Das spoke and afterwards read a number of proposed resolutions from the founder secretary attesting that the persons present supported the League of Devotees and that they recommended that the central government of India also support it as a movement for world peace based on Gandhian principles. After adoption of the resolutions, the meeting closed with another kirtan and prasadam. Abai was convinced that if his well-wishers and fellow humanitarians would support him on a grand scale, he could create a movement for world peace based on the principles of devotional service to Lord Krishna. But his role was simply to present Krishna consciousness to whomever he could. The results were up to Krishna. Abai was aware that good intentions of most of the participants in his Birla Mandir meeting would not go past that one meeting, but he wasn't discouraged. Through all his tireless evangelism, he maintained a philosophic jollity. In one sense, he was already fully satisfied, and he was happy to be working on behalf of his spiritual master. Although he was changing addresses so fast that his mail could hardly catch up to him, he wrote a newspaper ad for a home study course. Educational. Study the spiritual secret of Bhagavad Gita at home by correspondence and be a strong man. Full course fee, 50 rupees only. The instruction is imparted not in the ordinary imaginative way of qualified interpretations, but in the parampara system of preceptorial succession. All questions are properly solved. Apply A.C. Bhaktivedanta, student of all communities and nationalities are welcome. He had not published Back to Godhead in 4 years, since 1952, but he had decided to revive it. Back to Godhead was a mission worthy of his full attention, and it took all his efforts to collect the funds, compose the articles, see to the printing, and then distribute 1,000 copies. The money he would raise by attaining interviews and soliciting donations. One donor and friend was Justice Bipin Chandra Mishra, a Supreme Court judge in New Delhi. Justice Mishra says, he used to come to me once a month. I gave him donations for his paper. It was only a 4-page magazine, but it showed his study of the subject and his earnestness and his devotion to Lord Krishna. He appeared to be a very simple man and modest, and it was pleasant to talk to him. He had a smiling demeanor. The main thing was his humility. He could talk with affection and confidence, and he knew we were discussing things near to God. So every talk with him would sublimate us. I was a rather important personality at that time in religious affairs, but he would not be expected to make any contribution to the main religious life of Delhi at that time because of the language difficulty, because his aim was to reach the English-educated persons, not the Hindi ones, and also because his means and his popularity were not at all established. The magazine did not have a wide appeal among these people. Other religious leaders were all well established. The only thing that impressed one and was worth noticing at that time was the simplicity of his abiding faith in God's name and his mission. Writing articles was no problem. By the grace of his spiritual master, he was neither short of ideas nor unable to set them down. Translating and commenting on the Vaishnava scriptures, his pen flowed freely. He was inspired by the miracle of the press, the Brihad Mridanga. The work of printing his message down and printing it out 1,000 times with the awareness and urgency of speaking directly to everyone, not just people of Delhi or India, but everyone, put Abai into an ecstatic meditation. He would contemplate how copies of Back to Godhead could reach thoughtful people who might read them gratefully. Nor was maintenance a problem. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, Shukadev Goswami had declared that a devotee's problem was not food, clothing, or shelter. If one had no bed, he could always lie on the ground and use his arms for a pillow. For clothes, he could always find some rejected garments in the street. For food, he could live on fruits from trees. And for lodging, he could stay in mountain caves. Nature supplies all necessities. A transcendentalist should not flatter a materialist to maintain himself. Of course, Abai wasn't living in the mountains or jungle, but in the city of New Delhi. Yet he had virtually adopted the renounced mode Shukadev Goswami had suggested, not to punish his body or to prove himself pure and uncompromising, but because he had to live in poverty if he wanted to regularly produce Back to Godhead. For Abai, it was a great labor of love, and purchasing paper for printing became a priority even before eating. Neglecting his personal needs for preaching was a manifestation of his faith in Krishna, of which Abai suffered no scarcity. He had full faith that if he served Krishna, he would be provided for. To work alone was not an insurmountable problem. It was pleasant and simple. It was better than having to manage the neophyte inmates of the Gaudiya Sangha. The ecstasy of working hard to serve his spiritual master was not a problem. The problem was the condition of the world. According to the Shastras, the current age of Kali would create continual degradation in society. And Abai could see this evidenced every day in Delhi. Delhi, formerly known as Hastinapur, had been the ancient capital of King Yudhisthira, who 5,000 years before, under the patronage of Lord Krishna, had been the most opulent king in the world, and whose citizens had been fully protected and provided for. Now, after 1,000 years of foreign subjugation, India was again independent, and New Delhi was the capital. Yet, even in Abai's relatively brief 60 years of experience, he had seen Indian culture, which in his childhood had retained much of its original purity of the Vedic age, degrade. Now he saw a society in which his countrymen were victimized by the propaganda that they could be happy in gross materialistic indulgence. The British had introduced tea, tobacco, meat, and factories, and now, even after independence, these were a part of India's new way of life. Having driven away the British, the Indians were imitating Western ways, and India's leaders were deliberately ignoring the Vedic principles of God consciousness. The very treasures of India were meant to distribute to the whole world. Abai had seen how India had abandoned her spiritual heritage and gone running after the modernization of the West. But now, where was that material advancement? Were the Indians any happier in their independence than they had been in British days? To Abai, the overpopulated city was a hell of ruffians and fools. Although thousands of poor people were employed in the burgeoning steel mills and tire factories, their living conditions had worsened. Abai voiced his concern about these conditions in his Back to Godhead. Could the poor eat the nuts and bolts produced in the factories? Could they be nourished by cinema, television, or sex songs on the radio? The leaders were unable to see that abandoning spiritual principles had led to the very ills they officially abhorred. A decadent, rebellious youth, corruption in every area of civic life, and even economic instability and scarcity. When Abai had been a youth in Calcutta, there had been no cinema billboards advertising lurid sexual fantasies, but now India had developed the third largest movie industry in the world. And film advertisements were all over Delhi. Beef shops and liquor shops had sprung up. The newspapers regularly ran editorials deploring the degradation of young Indian boys who teased, insulted, and affronted women on the street. Women's leagues complained about increased juvenile promiscuity and the obscene treatment of women in films and advertisements. But there were no upright Brahmins or saintly administrators to do anything about it. Abai saw the need for a re-spiritualization of society, but society was rushing headlong in the opposite direction. In February, even as Abai was trying to publish his Back to Godhead, Prime Minister Nehru, while speaking with concern of India's crisis of the spirit, simultaneously launched another 5-year plan for rapid industrialization. Everyone, from the prime minister down to the common man, was convinced about the symptomatic problems, but no one seemed to understand that the real problem was the lack of God consciousness. Abai had to deliver the medicine for the ills of Kali Yuga. He knew it was needed on a much larger scale than he could reach on his own, but even to administer one issue of Back to Godhead was almost beyond his means. Writing the articles, typing them, taking them to the printer, distributing them, should not have been the work of one alone, impoverished devotee. But in the working with his God brothers, he had met with their decided lack of organization and their lack of desire for vigorous preaching. Bhakti Saranga Goswami had seemed determined to keep Sajani Toshani small, and his mutt, like so many others, had been ineffectual in attracting new members. This was the petty-mindedness that would cripple preaching. Therefore, he was now working alone on a small scale, happy in his spiritual welfare work, yet aware that his 4-page newspaper was only a drop of water in the desert.
In February of 1956, while the US was struggling with civil rights, while Khrushchev and Eisenhower were both openly deploring the arms race and were maneuvering in nuclear disarmament talks, and while the Shah of Iran was visiting New Delhi, Abe was trying to print Back to Godhead. In winter's discomfort, he walked through the early morning streets of Delhi to visit Surendra Kumar Jain, the printer, to read the latest proofs. By walking, he saved money. Only when he was delivering paper from the paper dealer to the printer would he rent a rickshaw. He had no chadar, only a lightweight cotton jacket, and he wore rubber shoes. He also wore a cotton hat that covered his ears and tied beneath his chin, protecting him from the 40-degree wintry mornings and the sometimes gusty winds. Kumar Jain. My first impression was that he was a nice person and straightforward. I felt pity also because of the conditions under which he would come. I know he didn't have even 25 paisa. He would come all the way on foot and without any breakfast or anything. He would come in the morning to the press, and when I would ask him, Swamiji, did you have anything to eat this morning? He would say, oh no, Mr. Jain, I just came because I had to see the proofs. That's all right, I would say. I will get breakfast for you. I would call for breakfast and then he would sit and work. He would do the proofreading himself. The printing was done by me, and most of the time he would like to be present when that final printing was being done. He would come in the morning around 7 and stay until he had seen all the proofs. It was a regular thing that he would come without breakfast. I would arrange for breakfast and we would sit across the table from one another for hours together. He was always talking on religious subjects only. But when we would be sitting, especially when waiting for the proofs to come, we would discuss many things. I felt that he knew quite a lot because he was a well-read person. He was more a friend than just a person coming to get things printed. He was a very simple man, straightforward in his habits, but his mission at that time was particularly to further the movement of Back to Godhead. His financial condition was very, very weak. Sometimes the printing would be difficult because he was not able to arrange for the paper. Many times I told him that if he was feeling difficulty, why was he continuing? But he said, no, it is my mission and I will always carry it on as far as possible. I tried to accommodate him to the maximum possible extent, but he was a real pauper. I only did the printing and he had to arrange for the paper. So sometimes it was delayed. Although my job was printing, sometimes I would say, all right, you are so keen, I'll give you the paper. But usually he would arrange for it himself. Since we only did printing, he would bring it in a rickshaw. We were not uncomfortable together, but as business would have it, if the bills were standing for a long time, then I would have asked him if he could do something about it. He would say, don't worry, you can be sure that your money is coming. I never asked him where his funds were coming from because I felt that it was his personal matter. but it was embarrassing for him when he could not pay. So I never tried to embarrass him. He was concerned that if he didn't have money, how could he print the paper? And he definitely wanted to run that paper. He wanted to preach the teachings of the Gita. He thought of it as a sort of movement, that it was the only way that people in the world could find peace. His conviction was very strong. After picking up the copies from the printer, Abhay would walk around the city selling them. He would take a seat at a tea stand, and when someone sat beside him, Abhay would ask him please to take a copy of Back to Godhead. He also went to the homes and offices of people who had already donated or agreed to see him, and he sought out new contacts, sometimes on recommendation or sometimes by going uninvited wherever he could find a potential reader. When he delivered copies to regular donors, he would discuss the previous issue's philosophy with them and sometimes write articles on topics they requested. Our esteemed friend, Sri Bishan Prasad Maheshwari, one of the learned advocates of the Supreme Court, has requested us to write something on the principle of fruitive action with special reference to vice and its potency. Often donors agree to see him not so much out of genuine interest or affection as out of a sense of obligation. In their traditional Hindu piety, they felt obliged to see the sadhu, take his paper, and even think well of him, but not necessarily to read his newspaper. Once, when Abhay was approaching a well-to-do house, the owner came onto the second floor veranda and shouted, "Go away, we don't want you here." Abhay, responding to the resistance, polite and impolite, that he met while selling Back to Godhead, wrote an article, No Time, a Chronic Disease of the Common Man, for the March 16 edition. When we approach some gentleman and request him to become a reader of Back to Godhead, sometimes we are replied with the words, no time. They say that they are too busy in earning money for maintaining the body and soul together. But when we ask them what do they mean by the soul, they have nothing to reply. Dr. Meghnad Saha, a great scientist, was busily going to a meeting of the Planning Commission. Unfortunately, while going in his car on the road, he died and could not ask death to wait because he had no time at that moment. Dr. Ansari, the great Congress leader, while dying in a moving train on his way home, said that he was himself a medical man and almost all his family men were so. But death is so cruel that he was dying to this also as to whither he is going. This life is but a spot in his longest sojourn, and a sane person should not be busy with the spot only. Nobody says that the body should not be maintained, but everybody should know from Bhagavad Gita that the body is the outward dress and the soul is the real person who puts on the dress. So if the dress is taken care of only without any care of the real person, it is sheer foolishness and waste of time. Abhay was an unusual newspaper vendor. He didn't loudly hawk his paper on the street or sell it from a newsstand. He approached individuals quietly as they sat to drink tea, or he would call on acquaintances in their offices or places of business. Taking a copy from the stack he carried underneath his arm, he would present what appeared to be an ordinary tabloid newspaper with bold, black headlines across the front page. But what odd headlines, the lowest of the mankind. Philosophical problems within social awareness, sufferings of humanity, the pure consciousness of nationalism. Anyone could tell at a glance that this was no ordinary newspaper. Abhay would say something to try to convince them to take it anyway, before they said no time. On behalf of his spiritual master and the previous Vaishnava authorities, he was playing a role, the newspaper salesman, a similar demeanor, a gentlemanly invitation. No, it wasn't an ordinary newspaper, but they would find it interesting, and it cost only 6 paisa. Thus, he was extending the mercy of Lord Chaitanya and handing out the truths of the Vedas in the easy-to-take form of a newspaper. Despite his desperate poverty and the urgency of his message, his writing was never shrill, strident, or fanatical. He wrote expecting to find his reader prepared to hear sound philosophy and always willing to accept the truth, especially when presented logically and relevantly and supported by the authoritative Vedic literature. Although experience on the streets of Delhi had shown him that people were shallow, distracted, and uninterested in self-realization, he knew that most people, at least at some time in their lives, pondered the crucial themes of philosophy. Whether God exists, whether he is a person, why there is suffering. So Abhay appealed to their higher sentiments. Spring of 1956 brought visits from US Secretary of State Dulles, and a few days later, Lord Mountbatten, the former Governor General of India, who was greeted at the airport by thousands. Then came the celebration of the once sacred Day of Holi, when urchins spray all passers-by with colored dyes. Prime Minister Nehru toured the Delhi slums, expressing disgust at the prevailing conditions. He announced India's intention to develop atomic energy, stressing its peaceful uses. The weather warmed. A border clash began between India and Pakistan. Delhi railway workers went on strike. Meanwhile, Abhay continued to preach. He somehow managed to meet the financial, editorial, and printing demands and published his sixth issue for the year of 1956, the May 20 edition of Back to Godhead. The front page carried a special notice, as a matter of principle. Please read Back to Godhead and revive your deeper aspect of personality. There is nothing in it which is our ideology manufactured by imperfect sense perception, but all that it contains are messages of our liberated sages. We are simply helping them to speak again to men and women in easy language for real life. Every responsible man and woman must therefore read it regularly at a cost of very insignificant sum of rupees 2 or 4 a year, or as 3 per month. Do not neglect it. It is for your interest. It will create a happy society of humanity. In How to Broadcast the Teachings of Bhagavad Gita, he talked about the need for spiritual organization in society. A model community, which he named Gita Nagari, the village where the Bhagavad Gita is sung, would live by the Bhagavad Gita and preach its message to the world. Praising Mahatma Gandhi for his Vaishnava qualities, Abhay suggested that Gandhi had also esteemed the Gita Nagari concept. It was the only way of relief from the sufferings caused by demoniac principled leaders who were misguiding the present demoralized civilization. He was calculating how to capture the restless popular imagination. He wanted to present Krishna's teachings in a clear, straightforward way and distribute them widely. He felt that good arguments from authoritative scripture would appeal to sane, impartial, educated people, even though they claimed to be uninterested. He knew that somehow, without abandoning his gravity and his absolute conclusion, he must capture their interest. They were relegating religion to some book of scripture on the shelf that they never read, didn't understand, or couldn't believe. He brought it to them as a newspaper, yet it was as good as the scriptures. No, it wasn't what they expected in a newspaper, but they might read it. The chanting process of the holy name of God, as conducted by the propaganda of Back to Godhead, is not pleasing to the superficial pleasure hunters describing men and women in indecent literatures in national news, but it is a means of relishing the transcendental eternal life. In addition to selling Back to Godhead at tea stalls and delivering copies to donors, Abhay also mailed out free copies, both within India and abroad. For years, the vast audience of English-speaking readers outside India had concerned him, and he wanted to reach them. Having gathered addresses of libraries, universities, and cultural and governmental outlets outside India, he mailed as many Back to Godheads as he could afford. He prepared a letter for his Western readers, suggesting that they should be even more receptive than his countrymen. Although the messages contained in Back to Godhead are all gifts of the ancient sages of India who actually realized absolute truth, yet at the present moment, the so-called leaders of India are too much enamored by the Western way of material advancement of knowledge. They are completely neglecting the treasure house of knowledge left by the sages. You gentlemen of the Western countries have seen much about material science, and yet peace is not within your control. In most cases, you may be feeling the want of peace, although you have enough materially. This basic defect of materialism remains undetected by the misleaders of India, and therefore they are not serious about going back to Godhead, the ultimate aim of life's journey. On the home front, Abhay sent copies of his latest issues of Back to Godhead to the President of India, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, along with a letter warning of the perilous fate that awaits a society conducted by asuras. Please therefore save them from the great fall down. Abhay's letter of November 21 was outspoken. I have got the clue of going back to Godhead just after leaving my present material body, and in order to take along with me all my contemporary men and women of the world, I have started my paper Back to Godhead as one of the means to the way. Please don't think of me as something wonderful or a madman when I say that I shall go back to Godhead after leaving my present material body. It is quite possible for everyone and all of us. Abhay requested His Excellency at least to glance over the headlines of the enclosed 12 copies of Back to Godhead and consider granting the editor an interview. There was immense work to be done on behalf of India's spiritual heritage, and there should be a specific Ministry of Spiritual Affairs for this purpose. I am crying alone in the wilderness at the present moment, wrote Abhay, but His Excellency never replied. In his Back to Godhead, Abhay was making propaganda against the atheistic view. In Hope Against Hope, he frankly admitted that 80% of the people he met while selling Back to Godhead were atheists. Sometimes we meet gentlemen of up-to-date taste and try to make them interested in the matter of Back to Godhead. They say very frankly that they have not only no interest in such theistic subjects, but also they condemn the attempt to bring back people in general to the path of Back to Godhead. According to these gentlemen, economic conditions of the Indian people deteriorated on account of their too much faith in God, and the sooner they forget everything about Godhead, it is better for them. But we cannot agree with this atheistic conclusion of such up-to-date gentlemen devoid of the sense of Godhead. Abhay urged that although independent India was now educating her citizens in godless materialism, her economic conditions were not improving. Many Indians did not even have the bare necessities of life. He cited that 120,000 were unemployed in Delhi. Some of the well-posted government servants or some of the fortunate businessmen may feel themselves happy, but 90% of their brother citizens do not know how to meet the both ends together, and therefore the economic condition is definitely not satisfactory. He quoted former United States President Harry S. Truman as saying that national independence means that the citizens should have a comfortable life. So if that were the case, said Abhay, where was India's independence? His point was that all attempts at happiness and prosperity are unlawful as long as they fail to recognize the proprietorship of the Supreme Lord. An atheistic civilization could never produce peace. In progressive ambition and unsatiated lust, Abhay wrote, there is no dearth of money, but there is dearth of peace in the world. The whole human energy having been diverted to this money-making business, it has certainly increased the cheap money-making capacity of the total population, but the result is that such unrestricted and unlawful inflation of money has created a bad economy and has enabled us to manufacture huge, costly weapons for destroying the result of such cheap money-making business. The authorities of big money-making countries, instead of enjoying peace, are now engaged in making important plans as to how they can save themselves from the modern destructive weapons. And as a matter of fact, a huge sum of money is being thrown into the sea for making an experiment on such dreadful weapons. Such experiments are being carried out not only at huge cost, but also at cost of many poor lives, binding thereby such nations in the laws of karma. Those who unlawfully accumulated money would find it snatched away by taxes for wars and other agents of illusory nature in the shape of medical practitioners, lawyers, tax collectors, societies, constitutions, so-called sadhus, famines, earthquake, and many such calamities. A miser who hesitated to purchase a copy of Back to Godhead by the dictation of illusory nature spent up to rupees 20,000 for a week's ailments and died at the end. A similar thing happened when a man who refused to spend a paisa for the service of the Lord spoiled rupees 30,000 in litigation affairs between members of the home. That is a law of nature. A worker in the New Delhi post office, noticing the title of the magazine Abhay was sending abroad, took the opportunity to argue his atheistic opinions with Abhay. Srila Prabhupada. The postmaster was an Arya Samaji, and he was talking to me about the paper, Back to Godhead. He raised the question, if we do our duty nicely, then what is the use of worshipping God? If we become honest, if we become moral, if we do not do anything which is harmful to anyone, if we act in this way, then what is the need of this? Because our paper's name was Back to Godhead, he was indirectly protesting. What is the use of propagating this philosophy of Godhead if we act nicely? That is the Arya Samaj's view, how to avoid God. So I replied that if one is not God conscious, he cannot be a moralist, he cannot be truthful, he cannot be honest. This is our point of view. You study the whole world just on these 3 points, morality, honesty, dutifulness. But if he is not God conscious, he cannot continue such things. To revive all these good qualities in society, you first have to invoke God consciousness. A Delhi man, noticing Abhay distributing Back to Godhead, remarked, "Where is Godhead? Can you show me God?" Abhay replied to the challenge, but he also pondered a deeper reply as he moved throughout the city during the day. On returning to his room, he began an article, "Where is Godhead? Is it possible to see him?" In the Secretariat buildings in New Delhi, there is an inscription on the stone that liberty does not descend upon a people, but it has to be earned before it can be enjoyed. Actually, this is a fact, and we have seen it that much sacrifice had to be rendered by people of India before they could gain Swaraj. But in the matter of Godhead, some irresponsible people ask, "Where is God? Can you show me? Have you seen God?" These are some of the questions put forward by some irresponsible men who want to have everything very cheap. If for attaining a temporary false sense of liberty in this material world, so much labor and sacrifice have to be requisitioned, is it possible to see Godhead, the absolute truth, so cheaply? To see God means complete liberty from all conditions. But is Godhead and attending orderly so that he may be present at my command? The atheist, however, demands like that, as if Godhead is his paid servant, and he thinks that Godhead is an imaginary thing. Otherwise, he would have appeared before us as soon as the demand to see him is made. One time, while he was walking on a secluded street, pursuing his Back to Godhead duties, a stray cow, the kind commonly seen wandering the streets of any Indian town or city, suddenly charged him, gouging his side with her horn, and knocked him down. At first, he couldn't get up, and no one came to help him. As he lay there, he wondered why it had happened. Summer came, and the 110-degree heat made it almost intolerable to spend time out of doors. Hot, dust-laden winds blew in the city streets. Street-side hawkers closed their businesses during the day. In early May, during 112-degree heat, a man collapsed in the street and died of heart stroke. But Abhay ignored the heat and the ordinary limitations of the body. One day, while delivering Back to Godhead to various addresses in the city, Abhay suddenly began reeling, half unconscious, overcome by the heat. At that very moment, an acquaintance of his, a man he had approached during his preaching, happened to be passing by in his car, and he took Abhay to a doctor. The doctor diagnosed him as a victim of heat stroke and ordered him to rest. On June 20, Abhay produced the eighth consecutive fortnightly edition of the year. Its front page article condemning both materialistic family life and false renunciation of family life. It had been almost 2 years exactly since he had left his home and taken to the Vanaprastha order, and his comments on family life seemed autobiographical as well as scriptural. He quoted a statement by Prahlad Maharaj from Srimad Bhagavatam. Persons who are always disturbed in mind with cares and anxieties of household affairs may quit off the place which is the black hole temporary abode, family life, to kill oneself and take shelter unto the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead by entering into the forest. And he admitted the management of a family is more difficult than that of an empire. But trying to avoid family life by living in the jungle without the real spirit of renunciation was monkey renunciation. In the jungle, there were many monkeys who lived naked, ate fruits, and kept female companions. The real remedy lies in the act of accepting the service of the lotus feet of the Lord. That makes one free from all cares and anxieties of life. That makes one able to see Godhead always and everywhere. Real renounced life, therefore, was possible without going into the forest. Even if one remained in the dress of a householder, he could be freed from cares and anxieties by engaging himself in devotional service. On September 1, US President Eisenhower condemned the Soviet secret testing of a nuclear bomb equal to 1 million tons of TNT and scoffed at the Soviets' claims for peace. In the Mideast, Egypt's of the Suez Canal, causing an internet at the UN to form a new international agency to help tame the atom for peaceful purposes. Abhay saw some of the headlines and heard talk of the latest news from gentlemen he visited. He frankly told them that without Krishna consciousness, the promises of cooperation by the politicians were all phantasmagoria. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had said that if only one soul could be turned into a pure devotee, his mission would be a success. Yet sometimes Abhay became overwhelmed when he thought of how small he was, how much work he had to be done on behalf of Krishna, and how difficult it was to convince even one conditioned soul. Chapter 9, A Resident of Vrindavana. I was sitting alone in Vrindavana writing. My godbrother insisted to me, Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, you must do it. Without accepting the renounced order of life, nobody can become a preacher. So he insisted. Not he insisted, practically my spiritual master insisted. He wanted me to become a preacher. So he forced me through this godbrother. You accept. So unwillingly I accepted. Srila Prabhupada. The passenger cars behind the locomotive moved forward almost silently, thumping at a slow rhythm over the tracks. The train pulled out of the station, past freight yards, a neighborhood of rundown tenements, the old Delhi fort, the garbage dump at Nizamuddin with its hundreds of crows and vultures flying overhead, and then past a marble-domed red sandstone mosque. Seated in a third-class compartment, his luggage stored beneath his seat, Abhay could see factory workers walking near the tracks, carrying their lunches in metal tiffins, and then the factories surrounded by huts of mud and straw. He passed the thatched roofs and tarpaulin tents, the cow dung fires that smoked in the morning air, the tall stacks of the Indraprastha electrical powerhouse spewed out a different smoke, and sooty black clouds poured back from the locomotive. He saw red and violet wildflowers blooming from bramble bushes at trackside, and beyond he saw the road to Mathura with its border of fruitless kikar trees. It was the morning train to Agra, and there were few passengers. Abhay would be riding as far as Mathura and then traveling by Tanga to Vrindavan. He had ridden widely the Indian Railway, especially in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, when he had traveled on business in Bengal, Punjab, Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Andhra Pradesh. He had been to Vrindavana several times. In his childhood reveries over the train timetables, it had been the first place he had thought of visiting. His first visit in 1925 had been but a brief pilgrimage while he had been in nearby Agra on business. Then in 1932, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had been in Vrindavana on parikrama. That had been a memorable visit. Abhay had heard him speak at Kosi, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had marked him. He likes to hear. And then at Radhakunda, 3 years later, he had been with his spiritual master again. But he had never gone like this, to live there, dressed in a simple white dhoti, his hand in his bead bag, fingering his japa beads. He looked out the window, quietly chanting the holy name. The train passed through the dense thickets of Faridabad and into the agricultural fields with their interspersed patches of wheat, dal, and sugarcane beginning at trackside and stretching for half a mile to the dry, uncultivated land that continued as far as the eye could see. The train sped faster. Rural villages drifted past the window. An hour out of Delhi, the land was mostly flat and open, dotted with small villages. Occasionally, he would glimpse a striking old temple, but mostly it was the land, now barren, with a few palm trees, now cultivated with irrigated fields under the expanse of blue sky and blazing sun. For a long time, Abhay had wanted to take shelter in Vrindavana, and now there was no obstacle. His purpose remained the same. He would write back to Godhead and deliver it to the printer in Delhi fortnightly. As long as he could afford to travel, he would return to Delhi to distribute back to Godhead, but he would live in the shelter of Vrindavana. He had in mind the room at the Vamshi Gopalji temple near Keshi Khata, a rooftop room that commanded a view of almost all of Vrindavana. And since his 1953 visit from Jhansi, he had kept in touch with the temple manager. In moving to Vrindavana, Abhay was following his predecessor spiritual masters. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and Bhaktivinoda Thakur had their house at Radhakunda and had preached in Vrindavana. Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, Jagannath Das Babaji, Vishwanath Chakravarti, and Narottam Das Thakur had lived either in Vrindavan or in Navadvip, near the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya and his immediate followers had an especially intimate relationship with Vrindavana. Lord Chaitanya had commissioned Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami to uncover the places of Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavana that over the centuries had become lost. Rupa and Sanatana had left their prestigious government posts and gone to live in Vrindavana. Dressed in simple loincloths, they had lived without fixed residence, staying each night under a different tree. They and Jiva Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, and Gopala Bhatta Goswami, known and worshipped as the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavana, had compiled a voluminous literature on Krishna Bhakti. They had inspired wealthy Vaishnava patrons to erect Vrindavana's great temples. Govindaji, Madan Mohana, Radha Damodara, Radha Ramana. At Radhakunda, shortly after Lord Chaitanya's departure from the world, Raghunath Das Goswami had chanted 100,000 names of Krishna and discoursed for several hours daily on the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. There also, Krishnadas Kaviraja had compiled the Chaitanya Charitamrita describing the life and teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Even those Gaudiya Vaishnavas who did not live in Vrindavana kept Vrindavana always in their hearts and proclaimed its glories. The Chaitanya Charitamrita describes the great ecstasy Lord Chaitanya felt while traveling from Puri to Vrindavana. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mind was absorbed in ecstatic love at Jagannath Puri, but when he passed along the road on the way to Vrindavana, that love increased 100 times. The Lord's ecstatic love increased 1,000 times when he visited Mathura, but it increased 100,000 times when he wandered in the forests of Vrindavana. When he was actually traveling in the Vrindavana forest, his mind was absorbed in great ecstatic love day and night. He ate and bathed simply out of habit. Vrindavana in the earthly manifestation of Lord Krishna's eternal spiritual abode, which the Lord himself described in Bhagavad Gita, there is another nature which is eternal and is transcendental to manifested and unmanifested matter. It is never annihilated. It is a supreme destination. When one goes there, he never comes back. That is my supreme abode. Krishna's activities of eternity, bliss, and knowledge, and his abode, Goloka Vrindavana, are described in many Vedic literatures. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, the first progenitor, who is tending the cows, yielding all desires in abodes built with spiritual gems, where he is surrounded by millions of purpose trees and always served with great reverence and affection by hundreds and thousands of Lakshmis or Gopis. Although Lord Krishna's abode, Goloka Vrindavana, is far beyond the material world, when Krishna comes to earth, he displays his eternal abode in Vrindavana of India. That 84 square mile tract is in North India is identical with the eternal world in the spiritual sky. To live and die in Vrindavana guarantees the devotee's transfer to the eternal spiritual world. The residents of Vrindavana, even the animals, are exalted. At the end of life, they will transfer to Goloka Vrindavana. Lord Brahma, therefore, prayed that he might take birth as a clump of grass on the outskirts of Vrindavana, so that these pure devotees would purify him with the dust from their feet. And Vaishnava Shastras declare that even by only a brief visit to Vrindavana, one can realize the Supreme Lord in his heart. Chaitanya Charitamrita states, like the transcendental body of Lord Krishna, Gokula is all-pervading, infinite and supreme. It expands both above and below without any restriction. That abode is manifested within the material body by the will of Lord Krishna. It is identical to that original Gokula. They are not two different bodies. The land there is touchstone, Chintamani, and the forests abound with desire trees, although material eyes see it as an ordinary place. The ideal place to execute Krishna consciousness is Vrajabhumi or Vrindavana, where people are naturally inclined to love Krishna and Krishna is naturally inclined to love them. The train arrived at Mathura. Abhay stepped down with his luggage and looked around, noting the recently constructed Mathura Junction building. Proceeding through the gate and out of the station, he found a Tanga driver, agreed on the fare, and started for Keshighat. For half a mile, the wobbling horse-drawn cart followed the road between the tracks and the railway yard. At the main road, they turned left, passed under a railroad bridge, and entered an open market. Piles of fruits, vegetables, and grains were displayed on the ground, their vendors sitting beside them, bartering and measuring while customers milled about. The women of Mathura, dressed in brightly colored saris, yellows, greens, pinks, and purples, moved busily in the market. The vehicular traffic consisted mostly of bullock carts, the drivers often squatting on the wooden yokes between the shoulders of their animals, whipping alternately one ox and then the other with a length of rope joined to a wooden handle. Although this was the most populated area in the trip to Vrindavana, compared to Delhi, it seemed simple and rural. The sun was high, but the Tanga's top provided a partial shelter, and the summer's heat had passed. Beyond the bazaar, the road curved to the right, and Abhay saw the nearby white domes of the massive sandstone mosque marking Krishna Janmasthana, the birthplace of Lord Krishna. Centuries ago, invading Muslims had destroyed the large Krishna temple and created the mosque in its stead. And now directly in front of the mosque stood a newer, smaller Krishna temple. They approached the three-way junction, New Delhi, Central Mathura, Vrindavana. The driver struck the horse with his whip and the Tanga proceeded along the Vrindavana road, edging through a herd of white cows. The herdsman walking amongst them, carrying his stick. The road was busy with tangas and slow creaking ox carts, loaded with market commodities and pulled by squat black water buffalo. A string of small spindle-legged donkeys carried oversized loads of firewood and sandbags. Although much had changed in Abhay's life since he had come here to see his spiritual master during the Parikrama years ago, Vrindavana had remained the same. He felt he had done the best thing in coming here, leaving the heat, the traffic and fumes, the human passions of Delhi. It was a natural relief. Yet, even as he felt transcendental emotions for Vrindavana, impressions of his months of preaching in Delhi lingered in his mind. The city streets and himself going from place to place with his back to Godheads. Life in Delhi had been constant, vigorous preaching. Now he was more than 60 years old, but he was not coming to Vrindavana to retire. He had retired from household responsibilities, but not from his responsibilities of making back to Godhead as popular and sophisticated as illustrated weekly. He would live in Vrindavana and commute to Delhi, but he would never stop preaching. The sight of taller trees signaled the precincts of Vrindavana as the thin horse trotted along past the police station and water trough for animals. On either side appeared the garden courtyards of private estates and ashramas. Fragile white malati flowers, golden marigolds, frangipani trees, red hibiscus, trees of sorrow, and many other flowers and trees, some known only in Vrindavana, bloomed forth in the brilliant sunlight. The Radha Govinda temple loomed fortress-like on his left, and opposite in the distance, the high-rising tower of Ranganath temple. They entered narrow streets, tighter and busier places with markets and city dwellings, and then it became quieter again. At the end of a narrow street by the Yamuna river near the Keshi bathing khata stood the small and beautifully ornate entrance of the Vamshi Gopalji temple, a narrow three-storied building with 3 domes and many decorated arches. Okay. Shall I continue? Mahant Gopal, the temple pujari whom Abhay had known since 1954, greeted him cheerfully. He was about the same age as Abhay and had long grey hair and an unruly beard. Although Abhay's attire was modest, he appeared well-dressed compared with Gopal, who wore only a coarse dhoti. Gopal led Abhay upstairs. Coming out onto the roof, Abhay smiled to see again the wonderful vista. Barely 100 yards away, he could see the Yamuna, not only the immediate patch of water flowing before him, but to his left and right, a broad curving sheet of river shimmering in the afternoon sun. There were sand deltas, herds of cows and buffalo grazing, the flat, grassy banks of the Yamuna, and plains and trees as far as the eye could see. And in the opposite direction was the town of Vrindavana, marked by dozens of temple spires and domes. Abhay's room, the only one on the roof, was small, with narrow double doors and barred windows. Sitting on the apartment's roof, monkeys with their tiny offspring sat watching, unalarmed. Just outside the door, a 2-foot-high cement pyramid signified that the temple deity was directly beneath. Abhay entered the room. Through the barred windows, he could see the palace at Keshi Khata, the venerable tower of the Gopinath temple, and beyond the uninterrupted flat river, the green banks, and the sky. After acquainting Abhay with the details of the room, the small kerosene burner, the rope, and bucket for drawing bath water from the well to the roof, Gopal meticulously produced a government-stamped rental agreement. Abhay wrote a short paragraph declaring himself a disciple of the late Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada and attesting to his renting the room at 5 rupees per month. Both parties signed. After his bath, Abhay took prasadam and rested. When he heard the bells ringing in the temple below, he went down to see the deities. Gopal, who had been the temple's pujari for many years and had seen its reconstruction in 1923, had told Abhay that the temple deity Vamshi Gopalji had been installed 350 years before by Mahant Prahlad Dasa of the Nimbarka Vaishnava Sampradaya. Gopal himself had installed the deity of Radharani. Vamshi Gopalji, standing in a graceful threefold bending form and holding his flute, was very appealing. He was 3 feet tall and of black marble. Radharani, slightly shorter, was of brass. They were simply dressed in rough white cotton and illuminated by the dim glow of a kerosene lamp. Abhay could see that they were being cared for, but because of poverty, there was no opulence. He returned to the roof as the sun was setting over the town of Vrindavana. Having the entire roof's walkway to himself, Abhay walked and chanted japa, enjoying the cooling early evening breeze from the Yamuna. Occasionally, a solitary boat would pass on the calm waters of the Yamuna, and a devotee somewhere unseen could be heard chanting evening prayers at Keshi Khata. He felt pleased with this location in the heart of the pastimes of Lord Krishna. He was not a newcomer spending his first day in a strange town. Everything here was already familiar and dear. As Vrindavana was Krishna's abode, Abhay was Krishna's servant, the servant of the 6 Goswamis, the servant of his spiritual master. He felt at home. As day turned to twilight, temple bells rang throughout the town. Abhay walked to the western side of the roof and looked into the city of thousands of temples. The Govindaji temple, Ranganath temple, and thousands of smaller temples were having their Sandhya Arati and Kirtana glorifying Lord Krishna. Abhay responded to the sights and sounds of Vrindavana as only a pure devotee could. His thoughts and emotions were full of appreciation and awareness of Krishna, Krishna's devotees and Krishna's land. Naturally, he began to think of preaching, hankering for others to know the intimate peace and ecstasy of Vrindavana. Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, was inviting all souls to join him in his eternal abode. Yet, even in India, few understood. And outside India, people knew nothing of Vrindavana or of the Yamuna or of what it means to be free of material desires. Why shouldn't people all around the world have this? This was the abode of peace, yet no one knew anything of it, nor were people interested. But this is what they were actually hankering for. Abhay thought of back to Godhead and how by Krishna's grace he might expand his preaching beyond India to the whole world. His God brothers, it would have been better if they had all worked together in the Gaudiya Math, but many of them were at least keeping the regulatory principles. None of them, however, seemed to be doing much beyond maintaining a temple here, an ashrama there, worshipping a deity, eating and sleeping. But there was so much more to be done in broadcasting the glories of Vrindavan. Abhay chanted and thought of Krishna. Gradually, he turned to his task of producing the October issue of Back to Godhead, due to be printed shortly in Delhi. He had a headline to keep. The next morning, before sunrise, the residents of Vrindavana were astir, bathing in the Yamuna, performing puja to their deities, reciting mantras, but Abhay was awake even before most, writing in stillness beneath the light in his rooftop room. As he wrote diligently in English, scriptural references appeared and took their place within convincing arguments. For hours he wrote, page after page in an exercise book, until gradually the chirping of awakening birds signaled the end of the dark night's stillness. Soon the sun would rise. Keeping to his regular schedule, he put aside his writing and began chanting japa, staying in his room, uttering the Hare Krishna mantra in a soft, deep voice. Even before the first traces of light in the sky, before the river was visible, a few Babajis reciting prayers made their way through the streets, heading for the Yamuna. By 4 a.m., gongs and temple bells throughout the city heralded the Mangalarti of the deity. Abhay continued chanting alone for another hour. Then he prepared to bathe, lowering the bucket on its long rope and hauling water up to the rooftop. It was light when he went out. his bead bag around his neck, a few copies of Back to Godhead in his hand. Turning right at the temple door, he walked the tight, crooked lane past alleys, dirt paths, and cross lanes, which interlaced in a winding network. There were no shops in the area, only silent buildings, many of them hundreds of years old. The neighborhood was serene. Behind closed shutters, someone played on wooden clackers and sang Hare Krishna softly. At a crossroad where dark women filled brass water pots from a well, Abhay turned left onto a street lined with small open porches. On either side, he saw ornate temple architecture. One entrance marked by two stone lions, another by a carved elephant with teeth like a tiger's. A brick and mortar wall was crumbling with age. Soon Abhay arrived at the Radha Ramana temple, established almost 500 years before by Gopal Bhatta Goswami, one of Lord Chaitanya's chief followers. Here, residents of Vrindavana were coming and going according to their vows, following a strict schedule that allowed not a moment's delay, making their daily visit to various temples. Abhay entered and stood amidst a group of worshippers, viewing the deity of Krishna, Radha Ramana. The deity, wearing a fresh garland of flowers, his enchanting black form adorned with bright silks and jewels, appeared very opulent. Knowing the priests of Radha Ramana to be respected, learned Sanskritists, some of whom also read English, Abhay had brought with him a few copies of Back to Godhead. He met Vishwambhara Goswami, a young priest in his 30s, who, after the death of his father, had left his law practice and taken over some of the temple management. The temple was run under a caste Goswami system, and thus for 500 years, Vishwambhara's ancestors had handed down charge of the temple. Although Vishwambhara had met many sadhus, he was immediately struck by Abhay's gentle and humble demeanor. He accepted the copies of Back to Godhead and sat and talked with Abhay. Abhay then continued along Vrindavana's winding lanes to visit another temple, Radha Damodara. He passed old Babajis and women carrying water, a commercial shop beside an open porch where people worshipped a Shivalinga, monkeys sitting atop a high concrete wall and ranging from roof to roof, ledge to ledge, chattered and gestured as Abhay walked beneath. As the morning progressed, barefoot children had begun to appear more frequently, playing within the open doorways. As he walked along chanting japa, his right hand in his bead bag, his lips moving softly, hardly anyone in Vrindavana knew him. But as an elderly, cultured Bengali gentleman, he did not seem an unusual sight. He was a religious babu, in a town devoted entirely to religion. Abhay would regularly visit Vrindavana's important temples, and afterwards he would shop, returning to his room around 11 with vegetables for cooking. Using the kerosene burner and a 3-tiered cooker, he would cook rice, potatoes, and sometimes sabji. He would also cook chapatis. He would take only one meal a day at noon, and in the evening a cup of milk. When he did not have time to cook, he would take the prasadam of the deity. After lunch, he would nap for 15 minutes and then write. He rarely received visitors, but stayed alone writing. Just before sunset, he would again go out visiting temples. At Keshi Khata, he would pass by sadhus sitting alone here and there, facing the Yamuna. The river itself was little trafficked. Sometimes a boat or two slowly moving on the river's placidity. Sometimes a fish splashed in the water or a bird winged along the river, watchful. Keshi Khata was quiet and beautiful, especially after the sun had relented for the day. Sadhus would hail Abhay on sight with Vrindavana's common greeting, Jai Radhe, and Abhay would return his Hare Krishna. While in the evening he walked through town, he would find himself amidst the vibrations of one kirtana after another. In the temples of Krishna, Rama, Chaitanya, Narsimha or Shiva, in ashrama halls, in homes, Wait, Mataji, you can start here and in the evening.
Okay.
Thank you, Hare Krishna.
When in the evening he walked through the town, he would find himself amidst the vibrations of one kirtana after another. In the temples of Krishna, Rama, Chaitanya, Nrsimha, or Shiva, in ashrama halls, in homes, even amongst groups walking on the streets, there would be kirtana. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. He would often see Bengali widows gathered together in a hall. Thousands of them lived in ashramas in Vrindavana, staying together with few wands, wearing dull white saris, keeping their hair cut short, never leaving Vrindavana even for Mathura, wanting only to stay in Vrindavana, to die in Vrindavana chanting Hare Krishna. A man would sit playing mridanga and leading a chant while a group of widows clapped their hands unevenly, responding in their childlike voices. The drum, the clapping, the singers, unpolished but earnest, made a sweet sound in the evening. As Abhay walked, no sooner would the sound of one kirtana fade than another would rise loudly before him and then fade behind him as a temple bell ringing formidably, mingling with the drums, cymbals, and chorus of another group or a single person passing near singing his own Radhe Radhe. Even the greetings were kirtana, Jai Radhe, Hari Bol. As faces passed, as carts clattered by, as men joked or made their last transaction of the day in the market, and as stray cows made their way home, their bells clanging around their necks, somehow everything was in connection with Krishna. And as Abhay returned to the secluded Vamsi Gopalji temple, there also he would hear kirtanas, only more private. Perhaps only a husband and wife in their room. The man playing mridanga and singing one line of a bhajana, his wife singing in response. Vrindavana was not ordinary. Every singer sounded sweet, in his own way an expert melodist, and everyone sang of Krishna. Krishna was present in every occasion and event. Srila Prabhupada, the glories of Krishna nobody can understand. Similarly, Vrindavana, the land which is known as Vrindavana also has unlimited potency. When you go to Vrindavana, you will find unlimited potency of spiritual atmosphere still. If you go to Vrindavana, you will see so many saints and sages, still they are worshipping Vrindavan Dham. As Lord Krishna is worshipable, similarly, his place, Vrindavana, is as good as Krishna. It is also worshipable. Commuting becomes difficult. He would take the morning train into Delhi and, having nowhere to stay, return to Vrindavana the same night. That didn't give him much time in Delhi, and it was expensive. At first, Mataji, it disappeared. Oh, yeah. At first, he had stayed with Mr. Gupta, a pious gentleman who studied the Gita regularly and afforded sadhus a place to stay. Abhay had explained to Mr. Gupta about his back to Godhead and his desires to preach in the West. It had been a good arrangement, and Abhay had kept to himself, writing. But in time, another sadhu took the room. Even with his minimal personal expenses, it was difficult to raise enough in donations to cover traveling, printing, and mailing. Giving copies of Back to Godhead away wasn't difficult, and he was doing that in Vrindavana. But working alone, writing, editing, selling, soliciting donations was too much. The printer, Mr. Jain, was amazed, wondering why a person would put himself through such difficulties, printing a newspaper he couldn't afford. Srila Prabhupada, I worked for Back to Godhead day and night. In the beginning, when I was a householder, I did not care if somebody paid or not paid. I used to distribute liberally. But when I left my household life and I was living alone, sometimes in Vrindavana and sometimes in Delhi, or sometimes traveling for pushing on BTG, they were very hard days. After his 12th consecutive fortnightly edition, the issue of November 20, 1956, Abhay ran out of money. Mr. Jain had to throw up his hands, saying he couldn't print simply out of friendship. Abhay returned to Vrindavana, where he spent his time writing, but with no plan for publication. It was because people weren't interested in becoming Krishna conscious, because they had no time, that Back to Godhead had failed financially. Certain sadhus in India were celebrated and influential, but Abhay was not amongst them. Of course, the uncompromising preaching he had learned from his spiritual master, the chopping technique in which he openly criticized revered politicians and holy men, was not likely to win him favor and patronage. Don't flatter, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had said. Speak the truth, and if Krishna is pleased, then you will come out successful. Money will come, and Abhay had firm faith in this. That was his outstanding asset, his faith in his spiritual master. He was sure that by following Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he would receive his blessings and the blessings of Lord Chaitanya. Although the last 2 years he had followed any path that had opened as far as it had led, he had remained one-pointed, aimed at serving the order of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He was confident sooner or later he would obtain substantial backing. He would find a sympathetic audience since workers would join him. A letter came to Abhay in Vrindavana from his disciple, Acharya Prabhakar Mishra, and it gave Abhay an idea. Acharya Prabhakar, who was in Bombay working as secretary of the Sanskrit department at the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, invited Srila Bhaktivedanta Prabhu to join him there for preaching together, just as in the old days. The founder director of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan was Governor K.M. Munshi, the same governor whose wife had pressured Abhay to give up the Radha Memorial in Jhansi. But Acharya Prabhakar, having recently established a friendship with the governor, intimated to Abhay that the governor might be willing to help. Thus, in January 1957, after assuring Mahant Gopal that he would return and then he would spend 5 rupees a month for his room, Abhay traveled to Bombay. Acharya Prabhakar got Abhay quarters in the faculty residence and introduced him to various scholars and religionists. They then attended a lecture by Governor Munshi. What is wrong with the world? Afterwards, Abhay approached the governor, expressing his appreciation of the speech, but stressing that it would take a spiritual movement to avert the imminent global disasters. Without God consciousness, even Mr. Munshi's work in the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan would be a waste of time. Abhay spoke of his interest in reviving the League of Devotees, and he suggested how he might work within the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan to infuse the life of God consciousness into the governor's cultural projects. Governor Munshi responded by offering Abhay a post as honorary professor of Bhagavad Gita. Abhay accepted and gave the governor some copies of Back to Godhead, requesting that he read them in his spare time. As honorary professor of Bhagavad Gita, Abhay began each class with Hare Krishna Kirtana and then lectured on the Gita, presenting Lord Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but he soon found his post confining. Within the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, he found little scope for reviving the League of Devotees. Then, along with other members of the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, Abhay attended the 5th annual convention of the World Academy of Sanskrit at Kurukshetra, where 5,000 years before Lord Krishna had spoken Bhagavad Gita. India's President Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Governor Munshi, and many scholars and panditas from all over India participated in the discourses. But everyone there had his own thing to say, apart from the conclusions of Lord Krishna. So Abhay considered the meeting a waste of time since he was not scheduled to speak, since the non-devotional discussions on the Gita disturbed him, and since he was that nothing practical would come of such a theoretical meeting, he left Kurukshetra and returned to Vrindavana. Acharya Prabhakar soon joined Abhay. As they talked together in Abhay's room at Vamsi Gopalji temple, Abhay spoke again of his desire to revive the League of Devotees. After having recently seen the watered-down cultural programs in Bombay and Kurukshetra, he felt even more keenly the need for a society of pure devotees. There were already so many cultural programs in Bombay and Kurukshetra, he felt even more keenly the need for a society of pure devotees. There were already so many cultural and religious organizations. If he liked, he could join one. But where was that organization with which he could affiliate himself wholeheartedly? Only the League of Devotees espoused the conclusions of Lord Chaitanya and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, vigorous worldwide preaching of devotional service to Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Abhay drafted an appeal to the generous public, modern philosophers, leaders, and religionists on behalf of the League of Devotees. The activities of the League, he stated, would be to publish Back to Godhead in English, with translations in many other languages, to educate young men and women for worldwide preaching, and to operate a press solely for printing transcendental literature. These programs would require an estimated 3,000 rupees per month, and he appealed for help. Abhay concluded, Vrindavan is the sacred place of the topmost importance, and the headquarters of his league is therefore situated here. Using the impressive new titles, Honorary Professor of Gita, Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, and Honorary Secretary of Hari Bhavan, Abhay, with the assistance of Acharya Prabhakar, launched another attempt at rallying support for Back to Godhead and the League of Devotees. Within a few days, Acharya Prabhakar returned to his post in Bombay, and Abhay was again alone in Vrindavana. He loved Vrindavana, yet with no means to publish and preach, he was not content there. If he were to travel, he might be able to enlist members for the League. He thought of Kanpur, which was nearby, a city of more than 100 big factories and many wealthy industrialists, some of whom he had met during his business travels. He decided to go. After printing some League of Devotee membership forms, he explained to Mahant Gopal that he would be away for a couple of months. The Mahant was surprised. Although most elderly sadhus who came to Vrindavana stayed put, and some even took vows never to leave his quiet Babu. This quiet Babu was coming and going constantly. Abhay preached actively in Kanpur, staying in various homes and canvassing for league members. As the guest of Anandeshwar Satsang Mandal, he lectured regularly at the popular Parmad bathing ghat on the Ganges. He especially made acquaintances among industrialists and educators. often sitting and conversing with them for hours, and many were impressed by his dedication and his soft-spoken talks. But his collections were small. When he offered the wealthy magnates his constitutional membership, they usually opted in favor of the 2 rupees a year subscriber membership. He collected a few letters of appreciation, but after 2 months he left. After some months in Vrindavana, Abhay decided to go back to Bombay and preach. In Bombay, he quickly broke off his association with the stifling Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan and moved out of the faculty residence there. Staying a week at a time in the homes of various patrons, he tried to generate interest in his missionary activities. When a friend of Acharya Prabhakar's arranged for Abhay to address Sunday evening crowds at a Bombay beach, Abhay accepted. Following already established custom, he sat on a cushion and the people gathered from 500 to 1,000, sitting and listening as he loudly spoke the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. Abhay spoke for several nights and there were other lecture opportunities also. One week he spoke several times at a Bombay Vishnu temple. But Abhay wanted to do more than deliver occasional lectures to uncommitted audiences. The conviction was growing within him that he should preach outside India. The idea, of course, had been there for some time. He had expressed it in his prospectus for the League of Devotees. Before gathering at the Radha Memorial in Jhansi, during his meeting at the Birla Mandir in Delhi, and on many other occasions. Informally, he had expressed it hundreds of times to acquaintances, and he had woven his dream throughout his writings. He was ready to travel anywhere if he could fulfill Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's order to preach in English. In India, the English-speaking population was small, so Abhay continued to dream of going to the West. If he could travel to Bombay, Delhi, and Kanpur, why not to London or New York, where millions spoke English and had never heard the message of Lord Chaitanya? Writing to Mr. Ved Prakash, a Kanpur industrialist, Abhay explained his idea. Lord Chaitanya said, Parinam Upakraya, that is, to say for the benefit of all living beings concerned. While rendering first aid service in the battlefield, the Red Cross men, although equally disposed, can you close? Equally disposed to all the wounded soldiers, they give first preference to the hopeful ones. The hopeless ones are sometimes neglected. In India, even after the attainment of Swaraj, the mentality is predominant by made in London ideas. It is a long story. But in a nutshell, the leaders of India, in the name of secular government, they have engaged themselves in everything foreign. They have carefully set aside the treasure house of India's spiritual asset, and they are imitating the Western material way of life, constantly engaged in the acts of error of judgment, misgivings, imperfectness, and duplicity. India's Vedic knowledge is above all the conditional defects mentioned above. But we Indians at the present moment have neglected such wonderful Vedic knowledge. It is due to its improper handling. This Vedanta Sutra is presented in India by unauthorized persons of different camps, and as such, the people are being misguided. Newly sprung up national enthusiasm of the Indian leaders, industrialists, and plan makers have no time nor the desire to understand the message of Vedanta Sutra or even the Bhagavad Gita. You cannot do acts of humanity without proper guidance. So my idea of preaching in the foreign countries means that they are rather fed up with material advancement of knowledge. They are seeking the message of guidance of the Vedanta Sutra, or for the matter of the Bhagavad Gita, in an authentic way. And I am sure India will again go back to the spiritual life when the principle is accepted by the Europeans, Americans, etc. Because the Indian people are now in the habit of begging after neglecting their own property. That was my point of view, but all the same, we must take only the opportunity of service. One way of expanding his way of preaching was to mail copies of Back to Godhead outside of India. And as an incentive for enlisting donors, he made it known that the donor's name would be printed on each copy. His ambition was to bring in large donations, run large printings, and send Back to Godhead to more than 50 countries. He assigned quotas. America would receive 10,000 copies. Argentina, 500. Belgium, 500. Brazil, 500. Burma, 1,000. Canada, 500. Chile, 500. China, 10,000, and so on, including 10,000 for Russia and 10,000 for England. But the donors and donations never appeared, and the plans for Back to Godhead were never realized. Abhay found that while people of India's educated cultural class were rejecting their own spiritual culture, the religiously inclined masses were being baffled by an array of conflicting, unauthorized doctrines presented in the name of Hinduism. An alarming example of this came to his attention as he was preaching in Bombay during the summer of 1958. Bhagavat Week was being publicized by a group whose teachings conflicted with the pure parampara presentation of the Bhagavata. The Bhagavata, Srimad Bhagavatam, was the devotional scripture par excellence, the literary incarnation of Krishna, yet the organizers of Bhagavat Week were using Srimad Bhagavatam to teach impersonalism and minimize Lord Krishna. Through friends, Abhay learned of the outrageous meetings, and finally, on July 28, 1958, he wrote to the Bhagavat Week leader, Sri Ratanshi, imploring him to stay away from Srimad Bhagavatam. I beg to inform you that I am in receipt of your invitation letter in the matter of observing Bhagavat Week through the Secretary of Bombay Spiritual Center. As I know what sort of Bhagavat Week can be observed by the Mayavadis for misleading the innocent public, and therefore I not only restrained myself from attending the function, but also I advised many others not to attend, for the very reason that the recitation of the Holy Bhagavat is being performed by men who have no access in this great scripture, in which only the liberated persons who are freed from all pretentious religiousness can take part. Some friends who attended your Bhagavat Week have told me how the pastimes of Lord Krishna were being wrongly interpreted in your organization on the pretext of saving Krishna from being an immoral personality. To save these foolish audiences in future, Maharaj Parikshit had already asked Shripad Sukadeva Goswami to clear the Rasalila activities of Sri Lord Krishna. The transcendental nature of Rasalila does not require to be apologized by any Mayavadi or mundane moralist. The Leela is what it is. In the sloka number 30, it is forbidden that a mundane person should indulge in hearing Rasalila or should hear Rasalila from a mundane person. In your organization, both the audience and the lecturer are mundane persons, and their indulgence in the matter of Rasalila out of sheer foolishness will result in imitating Rudra, who swallowed up an ocean of poison. Abhay warned the legal action could be taken against such a religious fraud, but Bhagavat Week continued and hundreds were cheated. While the professed followers of Vedic culture were being baffled in their allegiance, modern westernized Indians were rejecting Vedic culture as backwards and irrelevant. There was Prime Minister Nehru, who wasn't at all spiritually inclined. He was for modernization and for what Abhay called made in London ideas. At least Mahatma Gandhi, although he had never responded to Abhay's letters, had been spiritually inclined. But not so his followers, Pandit Nehru. Still, out of concern for the way India's leaders were rejecting their country's spiritual heritage, Abhay decided to write Pandit Nehru. Although in Bombay, Abhay was particularly homeless, in August of 1958, he boldly wrote the Prime Minister, expressing his conviction that India's spiritual culture must not only be revived at home, but also be distributed to the West. He reminded Pandit Nehru that from ancient Greece down to the atomic age, the Western world had seen only materialism and had therefore never known peace. If Nehru were to continue following the path of materialism, the only results would be strife and war. Therefore, India may not waste her time in imitating the Western way of life. You have admitted that the position of Indian culture is of high order, but at the same time, you want to bring in material prosperity by scientific advancement of knowledge. But what is that scientific knowledge? Spiritualism is also advanced scientific knowledge. Material advancement of scientific knowledge cannot give even material prosperity to the people in general. Do you think that horseless carriage or telephonic or radio communication or any other such ephemeral facilities of life can bring in material prosperity? No, it cannot. Material prosperity means the people must have sufficient to eat or to maintain the body very soundly. Do you think that your different plans have brought in that material prosperity or that modern Western civilization can bring in that prosperity? Even they are given that facility. The unrest will continue to go on till there is spiritual satisfaction of life. That is the secret of peace. Even without having been to the West, Abhay expressed his conviction that the Americans and even the Russians were hankering for spiritual realization. They could not have become satisfied merely with material advancement. Pandit Nehru, therefore, should help his friends in the West by offering them spiritual knowledge from India. Poverty means poverty of knowledge. Prime Minister Chanakya used to live in a thatched cottage, but he was the dictator of India during the time of Chandragupta. Mahatma Gandhi voluntarily accepted the way of living of the so-called poor man and was the dictator of Indian destiny. But was he poverty-stricken? He was proud of his spiritual knowledge. Therefore, spiritual knowledge makes a man really rich and not the radio set or the motor car, etc. Back in the 1930s, the Nehru family had bought their medicines from Abhay's Prayag pharmacy, and Abhay now appealed to Pandit Nehru as an old friend from Allahabad. Just as Abhay had requested Mahatma Gandhi, he requested Nehru to leave his political responsibilities and, as a popular gentleman of the world, engage the rest of your life in this organized spiritual movement to make a real adjustment of Western material science, combined with Indian way of spiritual realization. As with his letter to Gandhi, his letter to Nehru went unanswered. Among Abhay's former Bombay contacts was Mr. Harbanslal, a landlord who had once assured Abhay that he would provide him lodging whenever he needed. In the summer of 1958, Abhay went to call on Mr. Harbanslal, only to find that he had gone to the West. When Abhay learned that Mr. Harbanslal was traveling not only on business, but on a cultural mission, his imagination seized on the idea of an Indian on a cultural mission in the West. He wrote to Mr. Harbanslal asking for a place to stay, but also presenting his own cultural mission. Abhay knew that many Westerners respected Indian culture. He had heard from his German godbrother that although Indians who went to the West, especially to Germany, were well received, they were sometimes tested on their knowledge of Indian culture. So Abhay advised, Mr. Harbans Lal to teach the real conclusion of Indian culture as he traveled. I think the people need this Indian message in this hour of necessity when the atomic bomb is hovering over the head of the human society. Please, therefore, begin the activities for the benefit of all people in foreign countries, since you have gone there. Clearly, Abhay would have liked to have gone himself. Abhay also reminded Mr. Harbans Lal of his promise to provide him with an apartment. I am passing my days in Bombay in great inconvenience for want of a suitable residential place. But the letter never caught up with the touring Mr. Harbans Lal. Wanting to go to the West as soon as possible, Abhay visited one of his godbrothers in Bombay, Kripa Sindhu, and asked him to help. Kripa Sindhu, he came to my house and asked me to help him in going to America. He gave me some back to God heads, which he said I could show to people to ask for help on his behalf. I tried to do something in this regard. I introduced Abhay Babu to one man, a big industrialist, Hemraj Khandelwala. I went also. The three of us sat down, and I told the man how Abhay wanted to go to the West and how he was a good devotee and was writing and doing so many things. But somehow or the other, the man did not help. Kripa Sindhu told Abhay of how the Gaudiya Mutt in Bombay had sometimes been assisted by a pious business magnate, Mrs. Sumati Morarji, head of Scindia Steamship Lines. Abhay tried to see her but was unable. He did, however, see one of Mrs. Morarji's employees, a deputy manager for the Scindia company, who heard him out and, to Abhay's surprise, responded generously. Considering Abhay a genuine sadhu, the Scindia agent offered him 50% concession on a voyage from India to the United States. He even put it in writing. Abhay immediately began arranging for his passport and visa. But he could not raise even the half the fare. Back in 1956, in Delhi, he had been struggling and homeless. And now, as he considered his last 2 years of traveling out of Vrindavana, he felt that his position hadn't really improved. Perhaps Krishna didn't want him to succeed in this way. But one positive thing he had gained, determination to go to the West and preach. There he would surely meet with success. Alone and poor, Abhay returned to Vrindavana. He was 62, but he wasn't thinking of retiring. More than ever, his mood was reflective and renounced. Because few people knew him and because he wanted to write, he kept to himself. He enjoyed deep peace as a resident of Vrindavana. Outside his window, the sacred Yamuna flowed by in a peaceful panorama for his private audience. The Keshi Ghata neighborhood was quiet, though in the pre-dawn, he could hear a few devotees bathing and chanting. When the moon was full, the river seemed like a coolly resplendent jewel. And in the morning, the sun would appear like a red smudge, a fire burning through an opaque wall, at last bursting forth and clearing the entire sky. Until in the hot blaze of noon, while the room would be in shadows, Abhay could see from his window a shimmering sun high in the sky and glittering across the silver sheet of the gentle river. Without so much as leaving his room, from his doorway, he could see hundreds of temples clustered together for miles in the friendly town of Vrindavana. The various punctual kirtanas and bell ringings in the temples, the spontaneous songs to Lord Krishna in numerous homes and in the streets rose and filled the air with devotion. On the veranda, Abhay could chant japa, and there would be no interruption. He enjoyed a simple, almost carefree life of minimized physical wants. A few hours of rest at night, a little prasadam at noon, the simplest clothing. and he did not have to flatter anyone, support anyone, or manage anyone's life. His mind and intelligence were free and dwelt constantly on his service to his spiritual master. He saw his present circumstances as a preparation for a greater task before him. Despite his advanced age, he felt that he had barely begun his work, yet he felt confident. He had his vision of a world association of devotees. It was not an idle dream, although he was not certain how it would all come about. But he knew his duty. For the present, he would go on describing his vision, the vision of his predecessor, spiritual masters, in articles and books. But as soon as possible, he should go to the West. Westerners, he had concluded, were not satisfied with a materially comfortable life devoid of spiritual understanding. More than his fellow Indians, they would be open to a message of the absolute truth. He knew he should go, and he would go if Krishna desired. Abhay lived frugally in Vrindavana, kept exact account of every expenditure and every receipt. He carefully kept a ledger, but as if he were running a substantial business, even though his purchases were only a little milk, a few vegetables, charcoal for cooking, bus rides, and his major expenditure, postage. Abhay composed a Bengali poem, Vrindavana Bhajana. Its opening stanzas were specifically self-reflective and personal. I'm sitting alone in Vrindavan Dham. In this mood, I'm getting many realizations. I have my wife, sons, daughters, grandsons, everything. But I have no money, so they are fruitless glory. Krishna has shown me the naked form of material nature. By his strength, it has all become tasteless to me today. Yashyami anugrahnani harishe tadhanam shanaihi. I gradually take away all the wealth of those upon whom I am merciful. How was I able to understand this mercy of all the merciful? Everyone has abandoned me, seeing me penniless, wife, relatives, friends, brothers, everyone. This is misery, but it gives me a laugh. I sit alone and laugh in this Maya samsara. Whom do I really love? Where have my loving father and mother gone now? And where are all my elders who were my own folk? Who will give me news of them? Tell me who? All that is left of this family life is a list of names. As the froth on the sea water mixes again in the sea, Maya Samsara's plays just like that. No one is mother or father or personal relative. Just like the sea foam, they remain but a short time, just as the froth on sea water mixes again in the sea. The body made of 5 elements meets with destruction. How many bodies does the embodied soul take in this way? His relatives are all related merely to the temporal body. But everyone is your relative, brother, on the spiritual platform. This relationship is not tinged with the smell of Maya. The Supreme Lord is the soul of everyone. In relation to him, everyone in the universe is the same. All your relatives, brother, all the billions of jivas. When seen in relation to Krishna, they are all in harmony. Forgetting Krishna, the jivas Abhay received a donation from Kaviraj Baidyanath Sarkar to be used for printing 1,000 copies of Back to Godhead. Abhay promptly produced an October 20th issue of Back to Godhead with the donor's name on the front page. It was the first issue in 2 years. Another donor, Mr. Subodh Kumar Kapoor of Ramlal Kapoor and Sons, followed Mr. Sarkar's example and donated 1,000 copies for the November 20th issue. The front page article in the November issue was Truth and Beauty, and editorial in the Times of India speculating on whether truth and beauty were compatible, had opined that truth was not always beautiful, but often ugly and unpleasant. Abhay disagreed. Truth is so beautiful that many sages, saints, and devotees have left everything for the sake of truth. But we are habituated to love untruth from time immemorial in the name of truth. Abhay agreed, however, that mundane truth and beauty were incompatible. Not only was mundane truth not beautiful, it was not truth, and mundane beauty was not real beauty. To explain, Abhay told a story. Once a man fell in love with a beautiful girl who tried to resist the man's advances. When he persisted, she requested that he wait for 7 days, after which she would accept him. During the next 7 days, the girl took a strong purgative and laxative and repeatedly passed stools and vomited. She stored the refuse in buckets. Thus, the so-called beautiful girl became lean, thin like a skeleton, and turned blackish in complexion, and beautiful eyeballs were pushed into the sockets of the skull. The man appeared on the scene, well-dressed and well-behaved, and asked the waiting girl, who was depressed in appearance, about the beautiful girl who called him there. The man could not recognize the waiting girl as the same beautiful girl whom he was asking for. The same girl, however, was in a pitiable condition, and the foolish man, in spite of repeated assertion, could not recognize her. It was all due to the action of medicine only. At last, the girl told the powerful man all the story of her beauty and told him that she was separated from the ingredients of her beauty and stored them in the reservoirs. She also told him that he could enjoy the juices of beauty stored up in the reservoirs. The mundane, poetic, or the lunatic man agreed to see the juices of beauty, and thus he was directed to the store of loose stool and liquid vomit, which was emanating unbearable bad smell, and thus the whole story of beauty liquid was disclosed to him. Abhay went on to assert that literature, which did not describe the ultimate truth and beauty of the Supreme Person, was no better than stool and vomit, even though it presented as poetry and philosophy. In standard morality, Abhay explained, morality is the standard of activity by which supreme authority is satisfied. The scriptures contain moral codes prohibiting unholy sex relations, animal slaughter, intoxication, and gambling. Abhay attributed Mahatma Gandhi's success as a public leader to his observance of these moral principles. Abhay also praised the Vedic system of marriage. After the attainment of puberty, a woman wants a male. And if she is not married within that time and allowed to mix up with boys, it is quite natural that there is very chance of fall down either by the boy or the girl. Despite changing social conditions, Abhay argued, you cannot indulge in unholy connection with the opposite sex just because the social conditions have changed, because unholy connection with women in the beginning of all is the beginning of all immorality. In Scholars Deluded, Abhay presented a critical review of Dr. Radhakrishna's edition of Bhagavad Gita, citing specifically the 34th verse of the 9th chapter, wherein Lord Krishna declares that one should always think of him and become his devotee. Dr. Radhakrishnan had commented, it is not the personal Krishna to whom we have to give ourselves up utterly, but the unborn, beginningless, eternal who speaks through Krishna. Although the obvious meaning of Bhagavad Gita was that one should surrender to Krishna, the Supreme Person, impersonalists like Dr. Radhakrishnan obscured the direct meaning with their word jugglery. On the disappearance day of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Abhay keenly felt separation from his spiritual master. He perfectly understood that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's instructions were more important than his physical presence, and that, in fact, the spiritual master was present within his instructions. In this way, Abhay had always been with his spiritual master. Yet on this annual day, Abhay could not help feeling loss. He remembered how in 1932 he had been a grahastha and a new disciple. At that time, he had not been free to do as much service as now. Yet it had been in those years that he had been able to see his spiritual master, offer obeisances before him, eat the remnants of his prasadam, walk beside him, hear his voice, receive his personal glance. Abhay thought of their meetings together. How powerful had been Srila Bhakti Siddhanta's mission. His presses had been running day and night, printing magazines, books, and daily Nadia Prakasa. And Europe had been a promising new preaching field, with Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakura at the helm. The Gaudiya Math had entered into battle against Maya's forces, and Srila Bhakti Siddhanta had made all the disciples unafraid. Abhay had always been eager to serve his spiritual master, to serve within the Gaudiya Math with its headquarters in Calcutta. But exactly how he would serve had never been clear to him until his last letter from Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Abhay looked back on the more than 20 years since his spiritual master's disappearance. The Gaudiya Math had been undone by its leaders, and everyone else had scattered like leaves in a storm. It was an unspeakable loss, and it was an old story. How the big sannyasis had disregarded their spiritual master's instructions and had intrigued, disputed, litigated. Violent party factions, false leaders claiming to be world acharya, and which party had been right? No, both had been wrong, all wrong, because the Gaudiya Math had disintegrated. Now there were dozens of little madhas and no preaching, no real preaching as before. When he, Simhaguru, had cast fear into the Mayavadis, had led an army of young, powerful preachers to march throughout India and the world, and the greatest sufferers of the Gaudiya Math's dissolution were the people, the non-devotees, who had little hope of being delivered from the batterings of Maya. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had begun a spiritual revolution. But that revolution had now been overthrown by Maya. The scattered particles of Gaudiya Math had settled quietly into self-satisfied, insular, almost impotent units, and it was the people in general who suffered. Abhay groped after memories of his spiritual master. He felt secure in that his own relationship with Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was intact, continuing. Yet he felt helpless. He was diligently pursuing his spiritual master's order to preach in English. Yet without his spiritual master's physical presence, he felt small and very much alone. At times like this, he questioned the wisdom of having left his family and business. Lamenting Srila Bhakti Siddhanta's absence and the fall of Gaudiya Math, he composed a Bengali poem, Viraha Ashtaka. Srila Prabhupada, you're always compassionate towards the suffering jiva souls. On this occasion of your separation, I see only dejection, an unlimited ocean of mercy cutting an illusion. Nityananda distributed an ocean of flood of love of God. The Jati Gosai stopped the stream, but coming yourself, Lord, you revealed this illusion. So once again, everyone was immersed in the flood of love, even one so fallen, insignificant, and sinful as I. On the strength of Lord Chaitanya's order, you sent all of your servants door to door as gurus. There was preaching everywhere, from the sea to the Himalayas. Now in your absence, everything is darkness. O Srila Prabhupada, you are always compassionate towards the suffering jiva souls. On this occasion of your separation, I see only dejection. In the same way that Advaita Prabhu brought Lord Gaura, so did Bhakti Vinoda pray. His enthusiasm brought you. On the strength of his enthusiasm, you came and made everyone understand that India is a holy land. One who takes his birth in the land of Bharata must must make his life perfect and then preach to others. This Mahamantra message was preached everywhere. Now, in your absence, Lord, everything is darkness. Your ocean of compassion has all again been stopped. This spear of great misery has cut through my heart. Without Lord Chaitanya's message, there is just confusion. Seeing this, all the Vaishnavas feel pangs of separation. The conditioned souls are all in darkness once again. They're searching for peace, but are dying in an ocean of anxiety. O Srila Prabhupada, you're always compassionate towards the suffering Jiva souls. On this occasion of your separation, I see only dejection. Abhas was a dark view. The golden era of preaching had flourished in the days of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was no longer. By the influence of Maya, Abhay wrote, now everything is darkness. All devotional instructions have been destroyed. Now everything has been reversed. Meditating on that great personality possessed of the divine power to save the entire world. Abhay expressed his feelings of weakness and helplessness. Because of those not fixed in devotional service, many branches have spread all over. Your conclusive message did not touch the ear. Where will I get the strength of the Sankirtana movement? How could he, a tiny spiritual child, survive without his spiritual father? Now, who could save the world, which was so much more oppressed than ever before? Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had said that a dead man could not preach, only one with life could preach. As long as Abhay and others could deeply regret the Gaudiya Math's failure, there was still life and still hope. If everyone obtained this right and went out and made disciples, then the suffering souls in the world could be saved. It was useless to cry over what his godbrothers had done. Yet, in seeing and resenting it, Abhay found, within the pain of what might have been, a continuing spark of what still might be. Abhay sent this poem and Vrindavana Bhajana to Keshava Maharaj, who published them in the Gaudiya Patrika. One night, Abhay had a striking dream, the same dream he had had several times before, during his days as a householder. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati appeared just as Abhay had known him, the tall, scholarly sannyasi, coming directly from the spiritual world, from Krishna's personal entourage. He called to Abhay and indicated that he should follow. Repeatedly, he called and motioned. He was asking Abhay to take sannyasa. Come, he urged, become a sannyasi. Abhay awoke in a state of wonder. He thought of this instruction as another feature of the original instruction Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had given him at their first meeting in Calcutta. The same instruction that his spiritual master had later solidified in a letter. Become an English preacher and spread Krishna consciousness throughout the Western world. The sannyasa was for that end. Otherwise, why would his spiritual master have asked him to accept it? Abhay reasoned that his spiritual master was saying, now take sannyasa and you will actually be able to accomplish this mission. Formerly, the time was not right. Abhay deliberated cautiously. By accepting sannyasa, a Vaishnava dedicates his body, mind, and words totally to the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, renouncing all other engagements. He was doing that already. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had offered sannyasa to his leading disciples so that they could continue his mission. They hadn't done it. Preaching in the West had proved perilous. Even for Gaudiya Math's most recognized sannyasis. How could he, a mere householder, presume he could succeed where the others had failed? He was hesitant. The helpless, incapable feeling he had expressed in his Viraha Ashtaka was there, but now his spiritual master was beckoning him over all other considerations, even over natural humility. Now, although he was elderly and alone, the desire to preach just as his spiritual master had preached remained within him, a fierce though sometimes quietly expressed determination. Okay. I'll stop here. The Vedic standards and the examples set by the previous acharyas was that if one wanted to lead a preaching movement, sannyasa was required. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had taken sannyasa to facilitate his missionary work. Lord Chaitanya had taken sannyasa to further the Sankirtana movement. Of course, Lord Chaitanya was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But when his young students had been disrespectful towards him, treating him as an ordinary man, he had taken sannyasa. Because a sannyasi is automatically respected, Lord Chaitanya's acceptance of sannyasa was a calculated tactic. As soon as he began traveling throughout India as a sannyasi, he immediately attracted thousands of followers to the Sankirtana movement. Yeah. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta ki jai. Gaur Premanande Hari Bo.